I was 26 when I took a night shift job at a 24-hour warehouse on the outskirts of St. Louis. The building was massive, a former distribution center with rows of empty shelving, high ceilings, and the constant hum of a malfunctioning HVAC system. It was supposed to be simple work, inventory checks, equipment maintenance, and occasional forklift operation, but the nights were long and utterly empty, and the silence there had a weight I wasn't prepared for. The first night, everything seemed normal. I drove past the abandoned strip malls and warehouses that littered the outskirts, feeling a strange thrill at being the only person awake. Inside, the fluorescent lights flickered faintly, and the smell of dust and oil filled the air. I started on my rounds, checking the storage aisles and the loading docks. But when I passed the north corridor, I heard something, a faint scraping sound that seemed to echo off the steel beams. I froze. The corridor was empty, the overhead lights buzzing softly. I shook my head and kept moving, chalking it up to old building noises. By the end of the first week, I knew something was wrong. Small things began to happen that couldn't be explained. Boxes would be knocked over when I was certain I had stacked them perfectly. Pallets I had just organized would be shifted. The security cameras occasionally displayed shadows moving down the aisles, but when I ran to check, nothing was there. One night, around 2:30 a.m., I was doing an inventory check in the far west section of the warehouse when I heard a whisper. Leave. It was soft, almost carried on the hum of the lights, but it froze me in place. I called out, "Hello?" No response. The shadows along the wall seemed to stretch and pulse, and the air suddenly grew icy. My flashlight trembled in my hand as I scanned the aisles. That's when I saw it. A figure, tall and impossibly thin, standing at the far end, its head cocked at an unnatural angle. I couldn't make out any features. The figure didn't move, but I felt its gaze, like a weight pressing on my chest. I ran. Down the aisles, past the forklifts, through the loading dock doors, and didn't stop until I was outside, the cold night air biting at my face. I didn't go back inside. I spent the next few nights hiding in my car until sunrise, too terrified to enter. Eventually, I tried to rationalize it. Old buildings creak, shadows play tricks, exhaustion makes you see things. But the more I tried to ignore it, the worse it got. Footsteps echoed behind me even when I was alone. Objects would move just slightly when I turned my back. Doors I had locked swung open on their own. The figure, that black silhouette, seemed to follow me in the corners of my vision. One night, I was checking the upstairs office area. The security monitors had gone black except for static, except for one feed that showed a door I knew led to storage. I saw the figure on the monitor, gliding silently down the hallway, impossibly fast, moving closer with each second. My heart raced. I grabbed my flashlight and ran toward the stairs, but the building seemed to stretch endlessly. Hallways I had memorized twisted into impossible angles. I could hear whispers behind me, low and guttural, repeating my name over and over. Finally, I reached the main exit, but the doors wouldn't open. The handle rattled in my hand. Behind me, the scraping, dragging sound grew louder, accompanied by whispering, "You can't leave." I slammed my shoulder into the doors, finally forcing them open, and ran across the lot into the dark, empty streets. I didn't stop until I reached my apartment across town. I quit the job the next morning. The company tried to convince me it was just stress or imagination, but I knew better. Later, a friend told me that the building had a reputation. Years before, a night janitor had disappeared inside, never to be found. Employees who worked night shifts reported shadows, whispers, and figures moving at impossible angles. Some swore the building itself was alive, feeding on the fear of those who wandered its halls. Even now, years later, I avoid warehouses, especially at night. The memory of those corridors, the whispers, the scraping footsteps, and that black, featureless figure stay with me. Sometimes I wake in the middle of the night, heart hammering, thinking I hear it following me just outside my door. I know some places never forget, and some things never leave. Story the end. I had taken the night shift at the hospital because the pay was better than my previous job, and honestly, I needed the money. I was a new graduate nurse, still wet behind the ears, full of energy and optimism that the night shift would be quiet enough to let me catch up on paperwork and maybe even sleep a little between rounds. The hospital itself was old, a relic of the 1950s, with peeling paint in some hallways and the faint smell of disinfectant lingering in every corner. People said the place had character. I didn't believe in ghosts or anything like that, so I laughed it off as superstition. My first week was mostly uneventful. I got the night routine down, checking on patients, doing rounds, managing medications. Most patients were asleep or in quiet rooms, and the night staff were friendly enough. But the thing about night shifts is that the world outside seems to stop, and everything in the hospital becomes amplified. The hum of machines, the squeak of nurses' shoes, even the distant sound of someone coughing echoes like thunder. It was my third night alone in the emergency wing, working from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. The emergency department had its own little section, older than the main hospital, with long corridors and dimmer lights. Around 1 a.m., I was finishing up charting when I heard it, a faint tapping coming from one of the patient rooms. I paused, listening. Tapping again, slow and deliberate, like someone drumming their fingers on the bed rail. I told myself it was nothing, probably a restless patient. But when I peeked into the room, the bed was empty. The monitors were off, the IV line dangling as if it hadn't been used in days. I frowned. I'd checked this room just an hour ago, and the patient had been there, sleeping. I left the room, telling myself I was imagining things. But then I heard the footsteps. Not the usual shuffle of a patient or staff, but heavy, slow, deliberate steps coming down the hallway behind me. I froze. The hall was long and empty, no staff, no patients. I grabbed my flashlight and started walking toward the sound, trying to convince myself I'd find someone who had just entered. As I turned a corner, the hallway seemed to stretch further than it should, the fluorescent lights flickering overhead. That's when I saw her. A woman standing at the end of the hall. She wore a hospital gown, long and tattered, and her hair hung in wet strands across her face. She didn't move, just stood there, facing me. But what made my blood run cold was the eyes, completely black, empty, like voids. I blinked, and she was closer. Not moving like a normal person, but gliding. Every time I looked up, she seemed just a little nearer, her head tilting as if studying me. I ran. I don't know if I ran in a straight line or zigzagged through the hallways. All I know is that the fluorescent lights kept flickering, shadows dancing across the walls, and every time I dared to look back, she was there, closer than before. I reached the nurse's station, panting, heart hammering. The other nurse was on break, the station empty. I picked up the phone, dialing the security office with shaking hands. "There's someone in the emergency wing," I stammered. "A woman? She's not right." The security guard laughed nervously. "Are you serious? It's 3 a.m., Karen. You're tired. There's no one there." I insisted, my voice shaking, and told him I'd wait by the station. He said he'd send someone to check, but it would take a few minutes. I turned back to the hall. She was gone. I tried to calm myself, telling myself it was stress, my imagination running wild. But then I noticed something that made my stomach twist. The footprints. They were on the linoleum floor, wet, dark, leading from the end of the hallway to the nurse's station. Only no one was there to make them. The water didn't make sense. The floor was dry everywhere else. I called security again, practically screaming this time. "There are footprints," I said. "Someone's here, please." By the time the guard arrived, the footprints had disappeared. He walked with me through the hallway, checking every room. Nothing. Every door was locked, every patient accounted for. He gave me a skeptical look and muttered something about night shift paranoia. But I knew what I'd seen. For the rest of my shift, I stayed at the nurse's station, eyes glued to the hallway. Around 5 a.m., when the early morning staff began arriving, the hospital seemed normal again. The lights stopped flickering, the heavy air lifted, and everything smelled like the usual disinfectant. I asked around later, trying to find out if anyone had seen her before. Some older nurses mentioned stories about a woman who had died in the emergency wing decades ago, found in one of the rooms that no longer existed. Patients and staff reported seeing her from time to time, always late at night, always standing at the end of the hallway, watching. I transferred out of the night shift after that week. I told myself I couldn't handle it, but deep down I knew I was terrified for my safety, and not just my imagination. Years later, I've gone back to visit friends at that hospital during the day. Everything is bright, clean, normal. But whenever I think about the night shift, the emergency wing, the black-eyed woman gliding toward me down the hall, I still feel that chill, that sense of being watched, that feeling that some things in the night aren't meant to be seen. And sometimes when I close my eyes, I still see her standing there, head tilted, waiting. Story the end. I was 25 when I got a job as a night security guard at an old manufacturing plant on the outskirts of Indianapolis. It was one of those sprawling brick and steel complexes that had been abandoned for decades before a small company bought it to store their supplies. The building had been partially renovated, but you could still smell the damp industrial rot in the air, and the floors creaked like they had stories of their own. I took the job because it paid well for nights, and I didn't mind being alone. It was quiet, and I liked the solitude. That is, until the building started showing me that I wasn't alone. The first week was fairly standard. I did my rounds, checked doors, logged entries, and kept the office cameras on. The cameras weren't very sophisticated, mostly just old CCTV feeds that covered the main hallways and loading docks. But sometimes when I glanced at the monitor, I could have sworn I saw movement in areas where nobody should have been. Shadows shifting in the corners of rooms. At first, I chalked it up to the low-light distortion or my imagination, but the feeling of being watched started to gnaw at me. By the second week, I began hearing things. A faint tapping from inside the storage rooms, like someone running their fingers over a metal railing. Sometimes it was a low moan, almost human but distant, echoing through the empty hallways. Once I heard the sound of footsteps following me down the long central corridor. I spun around. Nothing. The place was empty. I started carrying a flashlight even in well-lit areas, though it didn't make me feel any safer. One night around 2 a.m., I was doing my usual rounds on the second floor. The building was completely silent except for the hum of the emergency lights. As I passed the old assembly hall, I heard a faint whisper, "Don't leave." My stomach dropped. I froze, shining my flashlight into the dark hall. No one. The words came again, clearer this time. "Stay." I nearly ran to the stairwell, my breath coming in short gasps. After that, things escalated. Objects started moving on their own. A box of supplies I had stacked neatly would be knocked over like someone had shoved it. Chairs would be slightly out of place when I returned to the break room. And worst of all, there were the appearances. Shadows at the edge of my vision. Faces in the glass of the doors that vanished when I looked directly. I started keeping a small notebook to track everything, half hoping someone else would notice, but I never told anyone. Who would believe me? One night, I was making my rounds near the loading dock when I saw something standing at the far end. A man, or at least he looked like a man, tall, thin, wearing a dark uniform. His face was impossible to see. I called out, but he didn't respond. I waved my flashlight, and when the beam hit him, he was gone. Just gone. My rational mind tried to tell me it was a trick of the shadows, but my gut told me otherwise. A few nights later, I was checking the cameras from the security office. One feed showed the main corridor leading to the second floor. I noticed movement, slow, deliberate. A figure was walking toward the camera, but something was off. Its gait was stiff, jerky, almost unnatural. The closer it got, the more I realized it wasn't a person at all. The shape was vaguely human, but the head tilted at an impossible angle, and the shadow it cast didn't match the movements. I blinked, and it was gone. I felt my pulse hammering. That's when I noticed the message on the screen that wasn't there a moment ago. "You shouldn't be here." I decided I had to leave. I told myself I was imagining things, that sleep deprivation was messing with my mind, but a deep, gnawing fear settled in my chest. The next few nights were the worst. I could feel it following me, always just out of sight. Sometimes I'd hear breathing behind me when the hallways were empty, or the sound of dragging footsteps across the concrete floors. One night, around 3:30 a.m., I was in the break room making coffee when the lights flickered and went out completely. The emergency lights cast a dim, red glow over the room. I froze, coffee halfway to my lips, because I could hear whispers, murmurs from the corners of the room. "Leave, leave, leave," they repeated. The sound came from every direction at once, surrounding me. I stumbled backward, spilling the coffee, my flashlight swinging wildly. And that's when I saw it in the reflection of the microwave door, a pale, faceless figure standing in the corner, impossibly still. I bolted, ran down the stairwell, past the offices, through the loading dock doors, and didn't stop until I was outside, the cold February wind cutting through my coat. I didn't go back inside. I didn't even take my paycheck. I later found out the building had a history. In the 1940s, it had been a factory where several accidents had killed workers. Stories circulated about people seeing figures in the hallways, hearing cries, even seeing shadows move objects. Some employees quit after only a week, claiming they couldn't handle the strange occurrences. Management never admitted anything. They just said the building had quirks. Even now, years later, I can't walk past old industrial buildings without a chill running down my spine. I still dream about that faceless figure in the break room, its head tilting in ways that shouldn't be possible, whispering in a voice that seemed to come from inside my own skull. I've never been able to shake the feeling that wherever it waits, it's still watching. I quit that job and never looked back, but the night shift stayed with me. The way silence can feel alive, the way shadows can have weight. I still wake up sometimes, heart pounding, hearing faint footsteps across my bedroom floor, even though I live alone. Because once you've worked nights in a place like that, you never really leave. You carry it with you. Story the end. I pulled into the empty parking lot of the factory just as the last streaks of daylight disappeared behind the horizon. The sign out front flickered, the neon letters buzzing faintly as if complaining about another night of emptiness. I had taken the night shift at the packaging plant out of desperation. The pay was decent for overnight work, but everyone who had done it before warned me it wasn't for the faint of heart. The security office was small and claustrophobic, lined with monitors that displayed every corner of the facility. I clocked in, and the motionless screen stared back at me like 100 unblinking eyes. The building itself was old, the kind of place where the air carries decades of grease, oil, and something else I couldn't identify. There were creaks and sighs in the rafters as if the building itself were alive. For the first few hours, nothing happened. I walked the floors, checked the machines, and logged everything. The hum of the fluorescent lights above was the only sound. Occasionally, a rat would scurry across a dark corner, and I'd jump more than once before realizing it was just that. Around midnight, the monitors caught my attention. A figure appeared on one of the cameras in the main hall, someone walking slowly just at the edge of the light. My stomach tightened. I knew the plant was supposed to be empty except for me. I double-checked the cameras. There it was again, just a dark silhouette, moving with a jerky, unnatural rhythm. I grabbed my flashlight and went to investigate. The hallway stretched into darkness, and as I shone the beam down it, the figure vanished. No doors were open, no other entrances visible. I shook my head and told myself I was seeing things. Shadows can play tricks on you when you're alone for hours in a dead building. By 2 a.m, the unease had settled into my bones. Every clink of metal, every creak of machinery felt magnified. I was restocking supplies near the loading docks when I heard footsteps behind me, slow, deliberate, echoing off the concrete floor. My flashlight snapped to the sound, but nothing was there. Then I felt it. A whisper, cold and wet, brushing against my ear. I spun around, and again, nothing. I moved faster, heart hammering, checking the cameras on the security screens. On the monitors, the shadowy figure had appeared again, this time closer, in the corner of the storage room. I grabbed the radio and called the plant manager. "Hey, I think someone's here," I said, my voice tight. There was a pause, then a laugh. Not a friendly laugh, but a low, rattling, bone-deep chuckle. "Don't worry about it," the manager said, trying to sound casual. "Probably just a rat or something." I didn't believe him. Minutes later, the figure was moving through the plant faster now. I could see it on multiple cameras, always just beyond reach. My flashlight flickered, and for a moment I swore it leaned toward me through the screen, like it knew I was watching. I decided to leave the floor, retreating to the security office. The door slammed behind me, and the monitors flickered violently. Then the whispering began, words I couldn't understand, but urgent, desperate. I clutched the radio again, but when I tried to speak, no sound came out. My throat was dry, frozen. One of the monitors went black, then slowly came back to life. In the center of the screen, a small child appeared, pale and thin, with dark, empty eyes. It stared directly at the camera. Then, impossibly, it blinked and was gone. I couldn't breathe. I called the manager again. No answer. My phone had no signal. Then the footsteps started in the office. Light, soft at first, then heavier, dragging across the floor toward me. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I could only watch as the shadows seemed to swell, pooling around the corners of the room. Suddenly, the office door creaked open. A figure slipped inside, something small and wrong, moving inhumanly. I stumbled back, tripping over a chair, and the flashlight rolled across the floor, illuminating the room in short, stabbing bursts. The child was there now, standing inches from me, head tilted in a way no human should be able to tilt. Its mouth opened, and the whispering grew into a shrill scream, echoing off the walls, rattling my skull. I scrambled to my feet and ran, heading for the main exit. The hallways twisted in ways I didn't remember, doors appearing where none existed before. I could hear it chasing me, the scraping, wet sound of fingers against concrete just behind me. Finally, I burst through the exit into the cold night air. The parking lot was empty, quiet except for the distant buzz of the neon sign. I didn't stop to look back. I got into my car and drove without headlights, not caring about the risk, until the first rays of dawn broke through the sky. I never went back. The plant remained open, of course. No one ever reported seeing anything on the night shift. I told myself it was exhaustion, imagination, stress. But even now, years later, I remember the feel of those empty eyes on me, the way the shadows moved like they were alive. And sometimes when I'm alone at night, I swear I hear a whisper, soft and urgent, calling my name from somewhere just out of sight. Story the end. It was a Friday night when I started my shift at the hospital in rural Pennsylvania. I was a night nurse, and I'd worked hundreds of shifts before, but that night felt off. The building was nearly empty, just a skeleton crew and a handful of patients who needed constant monitoring. The air in the hospital always had that sterile, slightly metallic smell, but that night it was stronger, almost suffocating. I arrived at 11 p.m., clocked in, and walked through the silent corridors. The fluorescent lights flickered slightly, like they were struggling to stay on. I shrugged it off, thinking the old wiring was acting up again. My first task was to check on Mr. Harris in room 307, an elderly man with congestive heart failure. When I entered, the room was cold, colder than it should have been. Mr. Harris was awake, staring at the corner of the room. "Mr. Harris?" I asked. He didn't respond. I walked closer, and I saw what he was staring at. A figure, dark and featureless, standing motionless in the corner. I blinked, and it was gone. "Are you feeling okay, sir?" I asked, trying to maintain calm. He didn't answer but pointed toward the hallway. I followed his gaze. There was nothing. I spent the next hour checking vitals, administering meds, and documenting charts, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I walked down the hall, shadows seemed to move just beyond the edge of my vision. When I turned quickly, nothing was there, but the feeling persisted. Around 1 a.m., the hospital went completely silent. Not the usual quiet hum of machines, not the soft beeping of monitors, just silence. I was in the nurse's station, reviewing charts, when the intercom crackled to life. A voice whispered, almost in my ear, "Why are you here?" I froze. The station was empty except for me. I looked around. Nobody was there. The intercom clicked off. My hands were shaking, but I had to check on the patients. I took my flashlight and headed down the east wing. Room 312 was empty. No patient, no nurse. But the bed was made as if someone had been sleeping there. Then I heard it, soft crying. Not a machine, not a baby, real crying. I followed the sound to the bathroom at the end of the hall. The door was cracked open. I pushed it gently, and the crying stopped instantly. The room was empty. But I saw it, words scratched into the mirror in what looked like blood. "Get out." My pulse quickened. I called the charge nurse on the walkie-talkie. No response. I tried again. Silence. I felt a breeze at my back. I spun around. A figure stood at the end of the hallway, impossibly tall, with limbs that bent in ways no human limbs should. Its face was featureless, smooth and black. It tilted its head slowly toward me. I ran. Down the hall, past the ICU, toward the main entrance. The automatic doors wouldn't open. I tried the emergency exit, locked. Everywhere I turned, the figure was there, following, gliding silently, moving faster than I could comprehend. I ran into the supply room, slammed the door, and leaned against it, gasping. The lights flickered, and in the shadows I saw multiple figures, dozens of them. standing in the corners, staring, faceless. The crying started again, all around me, echoing off the walls, overlapping. I pressed myself into the corner, trying not to breathe too loudly. Hours passed, or maybe minutes, I couldn't tell. When the first nurse came in for the morning shift, I was still crouched there, pale and shaking. She screamed when she saw me and called security. I tried to explain what I saw, but by the time they came to the supply room, the shadows were gone. The cameras had nothing, just static for hours. I never returned to that hospital for a night shift. I transferred to a day schedule, but I can't forget. Even now in my apartment, when it's silent, I feel the same presence, just on the edge of perception. Watching, waiting. Sometimes late at night, I swear I see a dark figure in the corner of my living room. It doesn't move like a human. It doesn't need to. It's patient. And I know it's only a matter of time before it decides I've stayed out past my welcome for too long. Story the end. I hired at the power plant right out of high school, just turned 19, mostly because I didn't have any better options and my uncle knew a guy on the night crew. The plant itself was enormous, a concrete and steel fortress on the edge of town, surrounded by chain link fences and a few small, shuttered buildings. By day it was noisy. Steam hissed, alarms beeped, machinery thumped, and engineers shouted instructions over the roar. But at night it became a different kind of place. Silent, vast, and heavy. That night's silence had weight. My first few weeks were mostly training. I learned how to check turbines, monitor the control room, and make rounds through the plant. The night shift wasn't glamorous, but I liked the solitude at first. Most nights, I had another operator with me, usually an older guy who had been there for decades, always grumbling but predictable. But every now and then I was left alone. They said it was safe. Nothing happens at night, kid. Just follow the routine, check the readings, and you'll be fine. I believed them, until the night that started just like any other. It was late October. The plant was quiet, almost too quiet. I did my first round into the turbine hall, flashlight in hand. The place smelled like hot metal and oil, and the echo of my boots bounced off the steel walls. I checked each turbine, jotted down numbers on my clipboard, and didn't think much of the building's oppressive silence. But halfway through my second round, I noticed something odd, a shadow moving along the catwalk above me. At first, I thought it was my imagination, shadows from the machinery, reflections from the lights, anything. But then it moved again, slow, deliberate. I called out, "Hello? Anyone up there?" No answer. The shadow froze when I spoke, like it had heard me. My stomach turned cold. I forced myself to continue, telling myself it was just a trick of the light. I checked the turbines, each one humming softly, everything normal. But the feeling of being watched didn't leave me. Every time I turned a corner, every time I bent down to inspect a valve, I felt eyes on me. I finished the turbine hall and walked to the control room. The fluorescent lights flickered as I entered, and the monitors displayed the usual readings. Pressure, voltage, temperature, but something felt off. The screen seemed too bright, too sharp, and I could swear one of them flickered like a face had appeared for a fraction of a second. I rubbed my eyes, but the feeling didn't go away. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, metallic, echoing down the catwalks above the control room. Not mine, not anyone's I recognized. They stopped when I stopped, moved when I moved. I called the operator's radio, hoping to hear a familiar voice. Static. Just static. I tried the main intercom. Nothing. The silence pressed in on me, thick and suffocating. I told myself to stay calm. It's an old plant. Steel echoes. You're tired. You're imagining it. I went to make my rounds through the secondary hall, a narrower corridor filled with pipes and maintenance equipment. That's when I noticed the first odd thing. The toolbox I had left neatly stacked against the wall earlier had been knocked over, tools scattered across the floor. I didn't remember moving it. My hands shook as I picked them up, trying to rationalize. Then I heard it again, a low, guttural whisper, so faint I almost didn't catch it. "Get out! Get out!" I spun around. Empty hallway. No one. Just the hum of the machinery. I started walking faster, flashlight beam bouncing wildly. That's when I saw the first face. Just for a second, a pale, gaunt man peering out from behind a pipe. No eyes, just dark hollows where they should be. I froze, heart hammering. The man, if it could be called that, was gone the moment I blinked. My rational mind screamed that I needed to leave, but every exit required passing through the plant floor. And that's when I realized the shadows were following me. Not all of them, but some. Dark, human-shaped figures that appeared at the edges of my vision. Whenever I turned to look, they were gone, but the feeling of being watched was constant. I ran to the emergency exit, but the door wouldn't budge. Locked. I pounded on it, screaming for help, but the echo swallowed my voice. Then came the whispering again, louder this time, all around me, coming from the shadows themselves. Stay, stay, stay. I dropped to my knees, trying to catch my breath. The shadows moved closer, flowing along the walls and ceilings, slipping around the pipes. I could hear their footsteps dragging and scraping against metal. One of them reached out. I swear it did, a hand made of shadows, and it grazed my shoulder. Ice cold, fingers tight and strong. I screamed, scrambled backward, and my flashlight went out. Pitch black. Only the sound of my ragged breathing and the whispers. Stay, stay, stay. I fumbled to turn the flashlight back on. When I did, I saw them. Multiple figures, all pale, thin, their eyes hollow, floating just above the ground. They didn't move like humans. They drifted, jerky and unnatural. One of them raised a hand toward me, pointing, and whispered again, Stay. I bolted for the maintenance ladder leading to the roof. My hands scraped on the metal, heart racing, legs burning. When I reached the top, I stumbled onto the roof, gasping for air, and looked back. The figures were at the windows now, pressed flat against the glass, staring at me, their mouths opening in silent screams. I didn't look back again. I ran across the roof, slipped down the fire escape, and didn't stop until I reached my car. I drove home in silence, hands gripping the wheel, eyes darting to the empty highway. I never worked nights at that plant again. I switched to day shifts, kept my distance, and refused to talk about that night. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt. The shadows are still in that plant, waiting, moving just beyond the light. And sometimes when I'm in a dark room or alone in a building, I hear the whispers in my ears. Stay, stay, stay. Story the end. I had just started a new job at a small, family-owned convenience store on the outskirts of a quiet town in Ohio. The owner, a wiry older man named Mr. Reynolds, hired me for the night shift, saying it was simple work: stock shelves, man the register, and keep an eye on the cameras. Nothing ever happens at night, he said with a shrug, but something about his tone made me uneasy. I chalked it up to first-day nerves. The first week was uneventful, just the usual late-night truckers and college kids stopping by. But there was something about the store at night that felt off. During the day, it looked normal. Fluorescent lights, shelves packed with snacks and soda, a small coffee machine sputtering in the corner. But at night, shadows pooled in the corners and every creak of the floorboards sounded louder. It was around 1:30 a.m. on my third night alone when it started. I was behind the counter, counting the till, when I heard the door chime. I looked up, expecting a customer, but the lot was empty. Maybe the wind had triggered the sensor. I shook my head and went back to my work. Minutes later, I heard it again, this time a soft, dragging sound from the back of the store. I froze. The back room was used for storage, and I was supposed to keep it locked. I grabbed the flashlight from under the counter and slowly walked toward the door. The sound stopped as I approached. I opened the door and shined the light inside. Nothing. Just stacks of boxes and old cleaning supplies. I told myself I was imagining things, maybe a rat or a stray mouse. But then I noticed something strange. The boxes weren't stacked the way I left them. A few were knocked over, and some had been shifted forward as if someone had brushed past them. My heart started racing. I closed the backroom door and locked it, trying to steady my breathing. I told myself I was being paranoid. It was just an old building. Things shift sometimes. Around 2:15 a.m., I decided to check the security monitors. There were 4 cameras, one at the front door, one covering the pumps outside, and 2 inside pointing at the aisles. The feed from aisle 3 caught my eye. There was a figure. It was tall, hunched, and dressed in dark clothing. At first, I thought it was a customer, but the aisle was empty when I looked. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and looked again. The figure was still there, standing completely still at the far end of the aisle, facing the camera. I felt my stomach drop. I grabbed the phone to call the police, but my hand was shaking too badly to dial. I turned around, planning to walk to the aisle myself, but as soon as I did, the figure vanished. I spent the next hour pacing, checking the cameras every few minutes. Sometimes the figure would appear, sometimes it wouldn't. And every time I looked, it felt closer, always at the end of an aisle, always watching. At 3:30 a.m., I heard a soft whisper behind me. I spun around, but the store was empty. The whisper came again, more insistent this time. My blood ran cold. I grabbed the flashlight and aimed it down every aisle, but nothing was there. Then I noticed it, the reflection in the glass door of the freezer. Someone was standing behind me. I whipped around, flashlight swinging, but the aisle was empty. My heart pounded in my chest. I backed toward the counter, my eyes darting to every shadow. The reflection in the freezer stayed for a moment longer, just a faint, dark silhouette before it disappeared entirely. I called the police then. When I explained what was happening, they said they'd send someone to check the area, but it would take at least 10 minutes. I stayed near the counter, gripping the flashlight, every nerve on edge. And then I heard it, a slow, deliberate tapping at the front door. Someone trying to get in. I peeked out the window. The lot was empty. No cars, no pedestrians, just the empty street in the dark night. I checked the cameras again. The figure was back. This time it was outside, standing just beyond the reach of the lights, at the edge of the lot. Its head tilted as it watched the store. I froze. I wanted to run, to hide, but my legs felt like they were made of stone. The tapping continued, slow and rhythmic. I backed away from the door, keeping my eyes on the monitor. The figure didn't move, but I could feel it, watching, waiting. The police arrived around 4 a.m. and searched the premises, but found nothing. They assured me everything was fine, just some prankster or maybe my imagination running wild. But I knew what I saw. I knew what I felt. After that night, I never worked alone on the night shift again. And sometimes, when I drive past that store in the dead of night, I see it. A dark figure standing at the edge of the lot, just beyond the lights, watching, waiting. It never moves, never leaves, and I know it's still there. Story, the end. I was 23 when I got a job at an all-night convenience store on the outskirts of Cleveland. It wasn't glamorous, but I needed money, and night shifts paid extra. The store had been around since the 70s, a squat brick building with flickering fluorescent lights, peeling linoleum floors, and a perpetual smell of stale coffee and cleaning chemicals. I thought it would be boring, just scanning items, making change, and occasionally dealing with drunk or tired customers. I had no idea how wrong I was. The first few nights were normal enough. I'd stock shelves, mop floors, and make sure the security cameras were working. The store had a back room I used for breaks and storing excess stock, and a narrow hallway that led to the manager's office and the restroom. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the hum of the refrigerators filled the air. It was the kind of quiet that felt heavy, like the building itself was holding its breath. It started small. A soda bottle would fall from the shelf with no one around. The coffee machine would turn on by itself. I'd check the security cameras and see flickering images, shadows moving down aisles where I'd just been alone. I tried to rationalize it. The building was old, electrical issues, maybe. I wasn't superstitious, and I laughed off the tiny incidents. But that laughter didn't last long. The first real scare happened about 2 weeks in. Around 3:15 a.m., I was restocking the snack aisle when I heard a voice whisper my name. I froze, glancing around. The store was empty. I tried to tell myself it was the wind or my imagination, but the voice came again, closer this time. Alex! I spun around and no one was there. My heart raced, and I told myself to get back to work, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. By the end of the first month, I was starting to dread the night shift. The strange things escalated. I would see fleeting shapes in the corners of my vision, figures that vanished the second I turned to look. Shelves would be knocked over, coffee cups shattered, and sometimes the cash register would open on its own, the drawer sliding out with a loud clang. Once I saw the front door's automatic sensors trigger, even though the door was locked and no cars were outside. Cynthia, another night shift worker I met after a few weeks, noticed the same things. She was older than me, maybe in her mid-30s, and had worked nights at other stores before. "This place is weird," she admitted one night as we took a quick break in the back room. "I've never felt anything like it. Just stay alert, okay?" I nodded, though I didn't know how I could stay more alert than I already was. Things came to a head one night in late March. I was alone in the store, the usual hum of the refrigerators filling the silence. The aisles looked endless, stretching into shadows that seemed to move slightly when I wasn't looking directly at them. I heard the soft jingling of the door, but when I looked, no one was there. I shrugged it off. Maybe a raccoon had triggered the sensor. Then the lights flickered and went out. Panic hit me immediately. I grabbed my flashlight from under the counter and swept it through the aisles. That's when I saw it, a figure standing at the end of the cereal aisle. Tall, hunched, completely black, featureless. It didn't move at first, just waited. I froze, flashlight shaking in my hand. Then it slowly started moving toward me, gliding, not walking. My rational mind screamed that it was impossible, but my gut told me it was real. I ran to the back room and locked the door, breathing heavily. I heard a thump at the door, then a soft scraping like claws on metal. My hands were shaking, and my flashlight flickered as if it were struggling to stay on. I called Cynthia on my cell, but she didn't answer. I was trapped in the back room with that thing somewhere in the store, and every second felt like an eternity. Finally, I heard it move away. The scraping stopped. The air felt lighter, though my heart was still hammering in my chest. I waited until the sun started coming up and the store would open, then I ran out, not looking back. I quit that same morning. The manager tried to get me to stay, but I didn't care. I left my uniform on the counter, my keys in the drawer. Years later, I learned from a friend who worked there briefly after me that the store had a history. In the 1980s, a night clerk had died mysteriously in the back room. Surveillance cameras had captured only static for hours before he was found. Employees reported strange occurrences ever since. Voices, shadows, objects moving on their own. The company never closed the store, but night workers came and went, rarely staying more than a few weeks. Even now, I can't drive past that area of Cleveland without feeling a chill in my spine. The memory of that figure, featureless and moving impossibly, haunts me. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and hear the faint jingling of a door or soft scraping from the corner of the room. I know it's been years, and yet part of me still feels that presence, waiting, patient, unseen. I've never worked nights again, and I don't intend to. There are places where the darkness isn't just the absence of light, where shadows hold weight and silence can move. I learned the hard way that some buildings never forget, and sometimes neither do the things that linger inside them. Story the end. I'd only been on the night shift at the hospital for a few weeks when I started noticing things that made me question why I'd ever taken the job. The place was a small, regional hospital in the Midwest, old and creaky, with a history that the locals loved to whisper about. They said strange things had happened there over the years, patients disappearing, odd sounds echoing through the halls, but I chalked it up to small-town superstition. Until I started working nights. The first few nights were quiet, mostly paperwork, routine checks on the patients, and occasional trips to the supply room. But by the end of the second week, I began hearing it. Footsteps. Not the shuffling, clumsy steps of exhausted staff or the rhythmic patter of visitors, but deliberate, slow, heavy steps echoing down the long, dimly lit corridors. I'd check the halls. Empty. Every time. Then came the whispers. Faint at first, almost imperceptible, just at the edge of hearing. The kind that made you turn your head, only to find nothing there. I tried to tell myself it was fatigue, the mind playing tricks after hours spent staring at fluorescent lights and hospital walls that always seemed too close. But the whispers got louder, sharper, and always seemed to follow me. One night, around 2 a.m, I was making my rounds in the ICU. The night nurse before me had warned me about the old wing. The place had been shut down for renovations years ago, but some rooms remained accessible through locked doors. Maintenance kept them sealed, but rumors said that staff sometimes heard noises coming from the rooms anyway. As I passed room 13, a number I had always found unsettling, the door creaked open just slightly. I froze. There was nobody there, and the door was supposed to be locked. My flashlight flickered, and for a moment the hallway behind me seemed to stretch longer than it should, the shadows twisting unnaturally. Then I saw it. A figure, pale and thin, standing at the end of the hall. It was hunched motionless, but its head turned toward me. There were no eyes, just hollow, dark sockets that seemed to pull at the light itself. My breath caught in my throat. I blinked. The figure was gone. I told myself I imagined it. A trick of light, fatigue, anything. But the next night, it returned. Closer this time, standing just inside the supply room door. I could see it more clearly, its skin grayish, almost translucent, its hands unnaturally long, fingers dragging across the linoleum floor as if testing the air. I called the charge nurse from the office. She laughed, told me to stop scaring myself. "It's an old building," she said. "Noise echoes weirdly at night." But I knew it wasn't noise. It was intelligence, deliberate, something waiting, watching. The real terror began when I started seeing movement on the patient monitors that shouldn't have been there. Flat lines that blinked once, then continued. Heart rate monitors spiking with no patient in the bed. At first, I thought it was malfunction, but the IT tech said everything was fine. The machines were old, yes, but reliable. One night, I was alone in the nurse's station when I heard the whispers again. This time, I could make out words: soft, urgent, desperate. "Leave. Now," they said. My stomach dropped. I told myself to leave, but I was frozen. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered, buzzing louder than usual. Then I felt a presence. Something cold, crawling along my spine. I turned slowly, and the figure was there, standing behind the counter, just beyond reach. Its mouth opened, and the whispers became a scream, piercing, unbearable. I covered my ears, backing away, tripping over the chair. The figure didn't move forward, but it didn't need to. Its presence was oppressive, like the air itself was turning solid. I scrambled to the door, threw it open, and ran down the hall toward the exit. Every step I took echoed louder than it should, the shadows stretching, reaching, almost brushing my skin. I didn't stop until I was outside, the cold night air hitting me like a wall. The hospital loomed behind me, dark and silent, but I could still feel it watching from the windows, from the shadows between the buildings. I never went back that night. I called in sick the next day, trying to tell myself it was fear, imagination, overwork, but I couldn't shake it. Every night, I could hear whispers, faint but insistent, creeping through my apartment, always the same words: "Leave now." Sometimes I think I can see it standing outside in the streetlight glow, just watching. I quit the job 2 weeks later. Some nights, I still dream about the hospital, the hollow eyes, the cold hands, the whispers that never stop. And I know, deep down, it isn't gone. It's waiting for the next night shift, for the next person alone in those halls. Story the end. It was a slow Wednesday night when I started my shift at the small, family-owned gas station on the outskirts of a town in upstate New York. I'd been working the night shift for almost 6 months, and normally it was uneventful. The customers were few, usually just truckers or locals stopping by for snacks, and the hours stretched long and quiet. But this night was different from the moment I walked in. The fluorescent lights flickered intermittently, casting long, uneven shadows across the aisles. The smell of fuel and stale coffee hung heavy in the air, but underneath it there was a coppery tang, like iron, almost like blood. I told myself it was just the old pipes or some spillage and pushed the thought aside. Around 11:30 p.m., the first customer arrived, a man in a black hoodie with the hood pulled low over his face. He moved slowly, deliberately, and didn't make eye contact as he wandered the aisles. I watched him from behind the counter, thinking he might just be a creep. But when he finally came up to the register, he didn't say a word. He placed a single bottle of water on the counter and dropped a crumpled $10 bill. I rang it up and watched as his hand, pale and shaking, reached out for the change. I noticed his fingernails, long, black, and jagged. My stomach churned, but he simply grabbed the money and left without a word, disappearing into the night. I shook my head, trying to dismiss it, and returned to stocking shelves. That's when I first saw it in the corner of my eye, a dark shape near the snack aisle. I turned quickly, but there was nothing there. The lights flickered again, longer this time, and I thought I saw the shadow move closer. I froze, telling myself it was my imagination. By 1 a.m., the store was completely silent, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator units. I was checking the inventory when the front door chime rang. Nobody entered. The chime rang again, then again. My heart started to pound. I rushed to the door and looked outside. Empty lot, empty street, nothing. I returned to the counter and noticed movement on the security monitors. At first, I thought it was a reflection, but then I realized it was a figure, Tall, thin, almost skeletal, standing at the end of aisle 7. Its head tilted unnaturally to one side, and it didn't walk. It glided, barely touching the floor. I shined my flashlight down the aisle. Nothing. But when I looked back at the monitor, it had moved closer, impossibly fast. I ran to the back office, locked the door, and tried to calm myself. That's when I heard scratching at the door. Not light scratching, heavy, deliberate, like claws scraping against metal. The sound came from every direction, echoing through the building. I backed into a corner, phone in hand, dialing 911, but the line was dead. No dial tone. My stomach dropped. The scratching stopped. For a moment, there was silence, then a whisper. It was faint, almost indistinguishable, like someone breathing right into my ear. You can't leave. I bolted to the supply room, hoping to barricade myself, but as I reached the door, the shadow was there in the corner, taller than the ceiling, head bent all the way back. Its face was featureless, a black void that seemed to suck in light. Its limbs bent at impossible angles, and the moment I saw it, I felt a cold rush of air, like the temperature dropped 20 degrees in an instant. I tried to run back to the office, but every aisle I took seemed to stretch endlessly. No matter how fast I moved, the shadow stayed the same distance behind me, gliding effortlessly. I tripped over a display stand, crashing to the floor. The lights went out completely, plunging the store into darkness. In the pitch black, I could hear it moving around me, circling. The whispers grew louder, overlapping, calling my name, mocking me. I pressed my back to the wall, covering my face, trying not to breathe too loudly. The air was thick, heavy, almost tangible. I felt something brush past my arm, cold, wet, like a hand made of ice. Hours, or maybe minutes later, the first faint light of dawn started to creep through the windows. The whispers faded, the shadows retreated into the corners. I crawled to the front door and pushed it open. The lot was empty, no trace of the figure, no footprints, nothing. I didn't look back. I quit that job that morning. I didn't call anyone. I didn't tell anyone. The memory stayed with me, though. Every time I hear a faint whisper in the dead of night, or see a shadow move just beyond the corner of my eye, I feel that same cold, impossibly heavy presence, and I remember the words I'll never forget. You can't leave. Years later, I still check over my shoulder when I'm alone at night, and I never, ever stay out after midnight, because I know some things aren't human, aren't bound by doors or walls, and they wait patiently in the darkness until they choose you. Story the end. I had taken the night shift at a large, mostly empty warehouse on the outskirts of Indiana. The company stored industrial supplies, and I was one of the few employees willing to work the graveyard hours. The pay was decent, and honestly, I figured it would be boring, quiet work. Check inventory, organize shipments, and make sure the security cameras were working. I thought I'd have the place to myself most nights, and for a while, that was exactly how it went. The building itself was massive, with high ceilings, narrow fluorescent strips flickering along the aisles, and rows of stacked pallets that created a maze-like interior. During the day, forklifts rumbled, employees shouted, and the place felt alive. At night, it felt like a different world. Shadows pooled in corners, and the echo of a distant drip or scrape could sound like footsteps following you. My first few weeks were uneventful. The worst problem I faced was a stuck forklift door, or the occasional raccoon that somehow found its way inside. But that changed on a night in late October. I arrived at 11 p.m. and started my usual routine. Inventory check, sweep the floors, log the security cameras. By midnight, I had everything in order, and the warehouse was quiet except for the hum of the lights and the faint creak of the metal rafters above. I always kept my phone on me, mostly for the clock or if I needed to call the security office, but I didn't want to be distracted. Around 1:15 a.m., I heard it, a scraping sound, soft like metal dragging across concrete. I froze. My first thought was one of the pallets shifting or maybe a loose piece of machinery. I moved toward the sound, my flashlight slicing through the darkness. The beam landed on the pallets, and nothing had moved. I shrugged and told myself I must have imagined it. Then I heard the footsteps, slow, deliberate, echoing across the concrete floor. I froze again, listening. The footsteps were heavy, dragging slightly, like someone was limping. I turned toward the nearest aisle, shining my flashlight down the narrow path between stacked pallets, empty. I tried to calm myself, rationalize it, Maybe someone else had a late shift. Maybe a delivery had come in and the driver was still inside. Uh, I checked my log. No deliveries scheduled. The building was supposed to be empty. By 2 a.m., I was on edge. Every small sound, metal clanging, boxes shifting, even the hum of the fluorescent lights made my heart jump. I checked the security monitors. 4 cameras covered the main aisles, and for a few moments, everything seemed normal. Then I noticed it. In aisle 7, a shadowy figure appeared on the monitor. It was tall, thin, wearing dark clothing, and it stood perfectly still. At first, I thought maybe a reflection or a trick of the camera, but the shadow didn't shift, didn't flicker. It was there, just standing. I grabbed my flashlight and walked cautiously toward aisle 7. Every instinct told me to run, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from the monitor. When I reached the aisle, the flashlight beam illuminated nothing, empty. The figure was gone. I backed up, panic rising. The cameras flickered, static cutting the feed for a moment, then coming back online. And there it was again, this time closer. At the end of the aisle, facing the camera, head tilted slightly as if watching me, I ran toward the office, slamming the metal door behind me, and called the security office. My voice was shaking. There's someone in the warehouse. I don't know who, but it's not right. The guard's voice was calm, almost too calm. Stay in the office. We'll send someone to check. I could hear footsteps on the concrete, moving closer. Heavy, deliberate, dragging, just like before. My stomach churned. I wanted to believe it was someone coming for me, a prank or a security guard checking in, but the sound didn't stop. It circled the office, echoing in the vast emptiness outside. The phone call ended abruptly. I realized the line had gone dead. I tried to call back. No dial tone. The fluorescent lights started flickering violently, plunging the office into near darkness for seconds at a time. I could see the figure now, reflected in the glass window of the office door. Dark, tall, its face obscured in shadow. But it wasn't moving like a human, more like it was sliding, gliding across the concrete. I grabbed a fire extinguisher and held it in front of me, shaking, heart hammering. The figure didn't move toward me, but I could feel it. Watching. Waiting. Every time the lights flickered, I thought it was closer. Around 3:30 a.m., I heard a whispering voice, low, unintelligible, coming from somewhere in the warehouse. My flashlight beam swung wildly, but the aisles were empty. The whispering grew louder, filling the room, surrounding me. I could feel it pressing in, as if the walls themselves were closing. Finally, at 4 a.m., the warehouse doors burst open. A pair of security guards came rushing in, flashlights cutting through the darkness. They found the aisles empty, no sign of anyone else, no footprints, nothing. I was shaking, barely able to speak, pointing to the monitors where the figure had appeared. But the monitors were normal again, just empty aisles. The guards exchanged uneasy glances and told me to finish the shift from the office. I never saw anyone else on the cameras again that night, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every shadow, every flicker of light made my skin crawl. I left that job a week later. I couldn't sleep for months after that night. And sometimes, when I drive past the warehouse in the dead of night, I swear I see a tall, dark figure standing at the edge of the lot, just beyond the reach of the lights, silently watching, waiting. Even now, years later, I can still hear the scraping footsteps in my dreams, slow, deliberate, relentless. Story the end. It started on a Tuesday night, the kind of night where everything seems heavier than usual. I had just finished my shift at the warehouse, a low-paying logistics job I had picked up after college because it allowed me to work nights. The warehouse was on the outskirts of Dayton, Ohio, the kind of area where streetlights barely reach and most of the buildings have long been abandoned. My shift was from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., and I liked the solitude mostly, except for the occasional unease that came with being alone in that giant, echoing space. That Tuesday night, I was the only one scheduled, though normally there was at least a skeleton crew to help with the overnight inventory. The night began as usual with me walking the perimeter of the warehouse, checking the locks, the loading docks, and the security cameras. I'd always thought the security system was overkill for a place that mostly stored furniture and old electronics, but the manager insisted. "You never know what you'll get in here at night," he had said, shrugging as if it were self-explanatory. I chalked it up to paranoia until that night. By 1 a.m., I was sitting in the small break room, sipping lukewarm coffee and scrolling aimlessly through my phone. The warehouse was silent except for the occasional creak of metal shelves settling. Then I noticed movement on the security monitors. At first, I thought it was just a reflection or maybe a glitch in the feed. But as I leaned closer, I realized someone or something was walking along the far side of the storage area, past the rows of pallets. The figure was tall, hunched, and moved in a slow, unnatural way, almost dragging its legs. I froze for a second, telling myself it had to be one of the cameras malfunctioning. But then it disappeared from view entirely. I got up to check. The warehouse was huge, with ceilings so high that the lights at the top barely illuminated the floor. I called out, "Hello? Anyone here?" My voice sounded absurdly loud in the cavernous space. Nothing answered except for the echo of my own words. I walked toward the area where the figure had been, my footsteps echoing on the concrete. I half expected to see a stray animal, maybe a raccoon or a stray dog, but the aisles were empty. I even checked the security room again. Nothing. The monitors showed empty space. I shrugged and told myself I was imagining things, probably stressed from working alone. The weird feeling in the pit of my stomach didn't go away, though. I finished my rounds and returned to the break room, sitting down again. That's when I first heard it. A whisper. Soft, almost unintelligible, coming from somewhere near the storage racks. I froze, straining to hear it. It didn't repeat. It was just a single, fleeting murmur. I grabbed a flashlight and slowly walked toward the sound, shining it down the aisles. Nothing. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. By 3 a.m., the feeling had escalated. It was no longer just an uneasy whisper. The air seemed heavier, almost charged, and the faint smell of something rotting filled the air, sharp and pungent. I tried to focus on my inventory work, but every few minutes I would hear something. A distant thump, the scraping of metal, a floorboard creaking where it shouldn't. The warehouse felt alive in a way that didn't make sense. I checked the cameras again. The figure was back, standing at the far end of the main storage aisle. This time I could see it more clearly. Its head was unnaturally tilted to one side, and its arms hung too long, dragging close to the ground. I could see it breathe, slow and deliberate, and I could feel its eyes on me even through the monitors. I didn't move for a long time, just staring, hoping it was a trick of the camera. But I knew it wasn't. I grabbed the emergency radio and called the manager. "Hey, someone's in the warehouse," I whispered, trying to sound calm. There was a pause, then static, then finally his voice. "You sure? Are you messing with me?" I could hear the skepticism, and honestly, I wanted to believe it was a prank. "I'm serious. I see someone," I said. He sighed. "Okay, listen. Don't approach them. Lock yourself in the office. I'll be there in..." He stopped abruptly. "You didn't hear anything just now, right?" I felt a chill. "Hear what?" I asked. He didn't answer and hung up. I ran to the office, which had a single metal door with a lock. I locked it and sat down, flashlight in hand, eyes glued to the security monitors. That's when it started moving toward me. Not through the aisles, but along the walls, sliding and creeping like it was ignoring the floor entirely. The cameras couldn't fully track it because it moved in ways that defied angles, sometimes appearing behind shelves where no one could physically be. The air in the office got colder. My breath was visible, misting in the dim light. Then the whispering returned, this time clearer. "I see you." I dropped the flashlight. My hands shook as I tried to pick it back up. The monitors flickered. I could hear the scraping sound getting louder, like nails on concrete. The office door rattled. I pressed my back against it, praying it would hold. My phone buzzed. A text. From the manager. Just one word, "Run." I didn't wait. I kicked open the office door and sprinted toward the main exit. The warehouse was a maze, and in the darkness it felt endless. Shadows stretched unnaturally, some moving independently of anything solid. I could hear it behind me, slow but relentless. My legs burned, lungs screaming, but I didn't dare look back. The front doors were still 100 feet away. I slammed through them, and the cold night air hit me like a wall. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. I locked the doors and sat there for what felt like hours, shaking, trying to catch my breath. I called the police. They arrived quickly, but by the time they got inside, the warehouse was empty. No sign of forced entry, no footprints, nothing. Just the faint odor of rot lingering in the air. They checked the cameras and saw what I had seen. The figure. But when they asked to review the footage more closely, the figure vanished, completely gone from the tapes. The official report called it an unexplained anomaly, and the warehouse owner insisted it was probably a security glitch. I didn't go back. That night changed me. I took other night shifts, tried to convince myself it was imagination or stress, but the feeling never left. Months later, a coworker told me that the warehouse had been built on the site of an old, long-abandoned asylum. Patients who had died there were buried haphazardly on the property. It explained nothing really, but it added a layer of dread I couldn't shake. I started noticing things in my life outside of work. Shadows flicking at the edge of vision, whispers in empty rooms, a chill in the air that had no source. Sometimes I would catch glimpses of the same figure from the warehouse in reflective surfaces out of the corner of my eye. It never approached me directly outside of that night, but it was always there, just far enough away to unsettle me. I started losing sleep. Nights became harder, and the idea of working alone anywhere after dark was unbearable. One night, desperate for sleep, I decided to do what I thought would help: ignore it, act like it wasn't there. I stayed home, lights on, trying to watch TV, drink coffee, anything to stay grounded. At around 2 a.m., I felt the whisper again, clear as day. You left me. The voice wasn't human. It carried weight, anger, and something hungry. I froze. Every instinct screamed to run, but I was home, safe, or so I thought. The lights flickered, and shadows started pooling in the corners of the room, thick and unnatural, moving toward me. I grabbed a baseball bat and swung at nothing. The air felt solid, like I was hitting something invisible. My phone died suddenly. Darkness fell. I bolted to the kitchen, flipped on every light, and even then, the shadows didn't recede entirely. I could hear scraping on the walls, low, slow, deliberate. My apartment felt like a trap, like the space itself had turned against me. I started sleeping in short bursts during the day, but every dream was the warehouse, that endless dark, the figure looming, whispering. Each time I woke, the sense of being watched lingered, stronger than before. Eventually, I quit the warehouse. I tried to move, change jobs, escape the nights, but the sense of being followed persisted. Every shadow seemed to twist unnaturally. Any warehouse, abandoned building, or dark space triggered panic. Friends didn't believe me. You're just stressed, they said. I tried to tell myself that. I tried rational explanations: fatigue, imagination, paranoia, but deep down I knew what I had seen, what I had felt. That figure, whatever it was, had marked me, and the warehouse had been the catalyst. Years later, I sometimes drive past that area on the outskirts of Dayton. The warehouse is still there, empty and falling apart, but at night I can swear I see it in the windows, tall, hunched, still watching, waiting. And sometimes when I'm alone in my apartment, I catch that familiar chill and hear the whisper, I see you. I have learned to sleep with lights on now, and even then, I never fully relax. I've told this story to people hoping someone will understand, but most just laugh nervously and change the subject. I don't blame them. There's a part of me that wishes I could forget that night, erase it entirely. But some things cannot be forgotten. The warehouse was only the beginning. The nights, the shadows, the whispers, they follow, always. No lock, no light, no amount of rational thought can keep it entirely at bay. And I know, deep down, that someday it will come back for me, relentless, patient, and unyielding. The warehouse may be miles away, but it's a tether to something else, something that doesn't rest. It watches, always. And I know I can't outrun it, not really. Story the end. I was 24 when I took a job as a night janitor at an old municipal library in upstate New York. The building was massive, built in the 1920s with stone walls and a grand, echoing atrium. During the day, it was a place of quiet reading and scholarly study, but at night, it became something else entirely. The security system was basic: a few cameras in the main hallways, motion sensors that rarely worked, and an alarm that only went off if a door was forced. The first night I walked in alone, I immediately felt a heaviness in the air, like the walls themselves were pressing in. My duties were simple: sweep floors, empty trash, clean the bathrooms, and make sure the lights were off when I left. The first few nights were quiet, almost unnaturally so. Every footstep echoed like it was magnified tenfold. The library smelled faintly of old paper, mold, and wax polish, and I quickly realized that the deeper I went into the building, the colder it became. Not just a little chilly, bone-deep cold that made me shiver through my jacket. The strange events began about a week in. While dusting the shelves in the fiction section, I heard whispering. At first, I thought it was someone hiding in the stacks, maybe a late student or a prankster. I called out, but the only response was a soft sigh that didn't match any human breathing. I scanned the aisles with my flashlight, but no one was there. Later that same night, I was mopping the main hall when I saw something that made my stomach drop. Across the atrium, a figure was standing near the staircase. It was tall, thin, wearing what looked like a dark cloak. The strange thing was that it didn't move, and its head was tilted at an impossible angle. When I blinked, it was gone. I told myself it was a trick of the shadows, a reflection in the polished floor. By the end of the month, the occurrences became impossible to ignore. Doors that were locked would be found open. I'd hear footsteps behind me on staircases where I was alone. Sometimes, when I was cleaning the reading rooms, I could hear low murmurs in a language I didn't recognize echoing from the walls. The worst were the shadows. They didn't behave like normal shadows. They lingered, detached from any object, and sometimes stretched along the walls like smoke. One night, I was assigned to clean the basement storage rooms. The elevator was broken, so I took the staircase down. The air grew colder with every step. At the bottom, the lights flickered, and the shadows seemed to pool in the corners. As I pushed the mop bucket down the hall, I felt a brush against my shoulder. I spun around. Nothing. The hairs on my neck stood on end. Then I heard it, soft footsteps following me. I tried to speed up, but the sound matched my pace exactly, never gaining, never falling behind. I called out, my voice echoing off the stone walls, and the footsteps stopped. I held my breath, listening. Then came a whisper, clear and icy. Leave. I bolted up the stairs and didn't stop until I reached the lobby. My heart was racing and my palms were slick with sweat. A few nights later, I was in the reading room when I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. A figure, small, hunched, moving silently between the stacks. I turned and it was gone. But then, from somewhere behind me, I felt a cold hand brush the back of my neck. I yelped, spun around, and no one was there. The lights flickered violently, and I swear I saw dozens of shadowy faces in the glass of the doors, all staring at me. I started bringing a small voice recorder with me, hoping to capture something rational. Footsteps, voices, anything. One night, when I played it back, I heard my own voice calling out, but layered beneath it were whispers I couldn't understand, chanting in unison. And then, faintly, my name, over and over. By the third month, I couldn't sleep during the day. Every creak of my apartment floor sounded like the footsteps in the library. Every shadow seemed to stretch toward me. One night, the alarm went off in the middle of my shift. I rushed to the source and found the main doors wide open. The snow was falling outside, untouched except for one set of footprints leading into the building. No one had come in. The prints disappeared halfway across the lobby, and the doors were now locked again. The final incident happened about 6 months in. I was closing up, making my final rounds alone. The building was deathly quiet. As I approached the staircase to lock the upper floors, I saw something I'll never forget. A figure stood at the top, taller than any human should be, cloaked in shadows. Its head twisted unnaturally to watch me. I froze. Then it started descending the stairs, slowly, deliberately. Each step echoed in a way that didn't match the wooden stairs. I backed away, heart pounding. My flashlight flickered and went out, plunging me into darkness. I ran. Down the hall, through the lobby, out the front doors, into the snow. I didn't stop until I reached my car. That night, I handed in my keys and quit, never looking back. Even now, years later, I drive past that library, and the memory hits me. The echoing footsteps, the whispers, the feeling of being watched. I've tried to rationalize it, but I know what I felt. Some places hold on to the energy of those who came before, and some things never leave. That library was alive at night, and it didn't like me being there. I've never worked a night shift again. I can't. And sometimes, in the middle of the night, I swear I hear footsteps behind me in my own apartment, slow and deliberate, even though I live alone. I know what it is. I know it's waiting. Story the end. I worked the night shift at a small town gas station just off the interstate. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills, and I liked the quiet that came with being the only person on duty. The store itself was a single building. A convenience store in the front, a small back office, and a tiny apartment above for the manager, though she rarely stayed overnight. Most nights it was just me, the hum of the fluorescent lights, and the occasional car pulling in for gas. That all changed one November night. I had just finished restocking the snack aisle when I noticed the first car pull in, a dusty black sedan, older model, with no license plate. The headlights were off at first, and I thought maybe it was broken down, but the driver didn't get out. They just sat there, engine idling, looking at the store through the glass windows. I felt uneasy, but tried to brush it off. Around midnight, the gas pumps clicked off, and the car was still there. I walked outside under the cold November sky, flashlight in hand, trying to see who was inside. But the driver's seat was empty. I called out, "Hello? Can I help you?" Silence. The engine was still running, the tires slowly vibrating on the cracked asphalt. I went back inside, convincing myself it was a weird prank or maybe a homeless person had been sitting in the car. But a few minutes later, the intercom buzzed, the little speaker crackling, "Don't leave. Stay." I froze. The intercom had been dead for weeks. I unplugged it, checked all the wiring, nothing. No explanation. I told myself I was imagining it, but the unease didn't go away. An hour later, while cleaning the floors in the back, I heard footsteps in the aisles. Slow, dragging, deliberate. I checked the cameras. Empty. The doorbell hadn't rung. Whoever it was, they were inside without entering the store the normal way. I tried to ignore it and focus on my tasks, but the feeling of being watched was suffocating. Shadows shifted in ways they shouldn't have, and sometimes in the reflection of the glass doors, I thought I saw someone standing behind me, only for nothing to be there when I turned. At around 3 in the morning, I was in the office, counting the till, when I heard scratching at the windows. I froze, listening. Then the whispering started, soft, almost a hiss. "Stay. Don't go." I got up and walked to the front, the flashlight shaking in my hand. The black sedan was gone, but the parking lot was covered in footprints, dozens of them leading straight up to the store. And at the door, pressed into the glass, were handprints. Small ones, like a child's, pale against the glass, even though no one was outside. My heart pounded. I tried calling the police, but my phone was dead. Even the store's landline had no dial tone. I was alone, trapped in that building, and the whispers grew louder, closer, coming from every direction at once. "Stay, stay, stay." I ran to the back door, trying to leave, but it wouldn't open. It was locked tight, even though it had been unlocked earlier. I turned to the office window and saw them. Children. Dozens of them, pale, with hollow eyes and twisted smiles, pressed against the glass, staring at me. They didn't move like humans. They slid, gliding, jerking unnaturally, and they whispered in unison. "Stay with us," I screamed, slammed myself against the door. Anything to get out. The whispering turned into laughter, low and guttural, echoing through the store. Shadows twisted along the walls, forming shapes, reaching toward me. One of them touched my arm, a cold, thin hand that left burns on my skin. I stumbled backward, hitting the counter, and everything went dark for a moment. When I came to, the front door was open. I bolted outside, ran to my car, and didn't look back until I reached the interstate. The gas station looked normal from the road, lights on, empty parking lot, no sign of the footprints, no children, nothing, just the silence of the night. I quit that job the next day. I never told anyone the full story. I don't think anyone would believe me. But sometimes when I drive late at night or stop at a gas station alone, I swear I hear that whispering, just at the edge of hearing. Stay, stay, stay. Story, the end. I started my night shift at the warehouse on the outskirts of town just as the sun dipped below the horizon. The place was massive, an old distribution center with rows of towering shelves, narrow aisles, and a maze of offices tucked in one corner. By day, it was busy with forklifts, shouting supervisors, and trucks pulling in and out. By night, it was a different world entirely, silent, vast, and full of shadows. The first few nights were uneventful. My job was simple: monitor security cameras, check inventory, make sure everything stayed in order. Occasionally, the night janitor would wave as he cleaned the floors, his mop squeaking on the concrete. But most of the night, I was completely alone. About 2 weeks in, I started noticing small things. Doors that I was sure I had locked were sometimes slightly ajar. Pallets that had been stacked neatly were knocked over, but only in aisles far from the cameras. I shrugged it off as fatigue. The night shift played tricks on your mind. Then the noises started. At first, it was subtle, scraping along the floor like someone dragging something heavy across concrete. I checked the cameras. Nothing. The aisles were empty. My stomach tightened. One night, around 1 a.m., I was doing a routine sweep of the warehouse floor. The fluorescent lights flickered above me, buzzing and popping. The air was thick, with the smell of dust and machinery. That's when I heard it, a faint whisper, echoing through the aisles. I froze, straining to hear. It came again, closer this time. I spun around, flashlight in hand, but the aisle behind me was empty. My pulse quickened. I decided to call my supervisor, but my phone had no signal. That was strange. Inside the warehouse, I usually had reception. A cold chill ran down my spine, and I felt like I was being watched. Then I saw it on the cameras, a figure, hunched, moving slowly between the shelves. The camera feed glitched for a second, but when it returned, the figure had vanished. I raced to the aisle it had been in. Empty. Nothing. Just the echo of my own footsteps. Over the next few nights, the activity escalated. I started hearing whispers all over the warehouse coming from multiple directions. Heavy footsteps followed me, though the floor was empty. I found pallets overturned, boxes ripped open, and messages scratched into the concrete floors. Words like leave and go appeared in hasty, jagged letters, as if someone or something was trying to communicate. One night I was sitting at the security desk, monitors flickering, when I saw it clearly. A small figure, pale and thin, standing at the end of a far aisle. Its head tilted unnaturally, and its eyes, or what I assumed were eyes, stared straight at me. I froze. It didn't move, but the sense of malice was palpable. I backed away slowly, keeping my flashlight on it, but when I turned a corner to get a closer look, it was gone. The only thing left was a faint, lingering chill in the air and the soft sound of whispering, like hundreds of voices speaking all at once, just below the threshold of hearing. The final night was the worst. I was doing my rounds near the loading docks when I saw shadows moving in impossible ways, stretching along the walls, curling around corners. The whispering was deafening now, urging me to run. I tried, but the aisles seemed to twist and turn differently than before, like the warehouse itself was alive and closing in around me. Then I felt it, breath on the back of my neck, cold and wet. I spun around, but there was nothing there. My flashlight flickered and went out. In the darkness, I could hear it, scraping, breathing, whispering, moving closer. My legs moved on instinct, running blindly through the maze of shelves that's guided only by the faint emergency exit lights. When I finally burst out of the building into the night, I was shaking uncontrollably. The warehouse loomed behind me, silent and dark, like nothing had happened. I never went back. My supervisor acted like I had just had a rough night and warned me to take a break. But I knew what I had seen and heard. To this day, whenever I drive past that warehouse, I can't shake the feeling that something is watching from inside, waiting for the next night shift worker to wander its endless shadowed aisles. I quit that job, but the whispers follow me in my dreams, cold and insistent, urging me to leave before it's too late. Story the end. It was a quiet Thursday night when I started my shift at the Walmart on the outskirts of a small town in Missouri. I'd been working nights for over a year, and while most shifts were uneventful, there was always something unnerving about the stillness of the store after midnight. That night, however, it wasn't just quiet, it was oppressive. The fluorescent lights buzzed intermittently, and the usual hum of refrigeration units seemed louder than normal, almost like a low growl reverberating through the empty aisles. I clocked in at 11 p.m., grabbed my vest, and did a quick walkthrough of the store. Everything looked normal, or at least as normal as a nearly deserted Walmart could look at that hour. The first couple of hours passed slowly, with only a few customers wandering in and out. But around 1:15 a.m., I noticed something strange on the security monitors. A figure appeared in aisle 12, but when I walked over to check, the aisle was empty. I shrugged it off, thinking it was just a glitch in the camera system. But then it happened again in aisle 7, and again in the frozen foods section. Each time, the figure appeared blurry at first, like it was moving too fast to be seen clearly. But I could make out the shape, tall, unnaturally thin, head tilted at a grotesque angle. By 2:30 a.m., the store was completely empty except for me. The usual comforting hum of fluorescent lights now seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. I was stocking shelves when I felt a chill run down my spine, and I realized the temperature in the store had dropped significantly. My breath came out in visible puffs, and I could hear faint scratching noises coming from the end of the aisle. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it down the aisle. Nothing. But when I turned my head, I saw movement in the corner of the store, just beyond the frozen food section. I froze. The figure was there, taller than any human should be, limbs bending in unnatural angles, face featureless and black. It didn't move like it was walking. It glided silently toward me. I ran to the electronics section, hoping to find a coworker, but the store was deserted. Every aisle I turned into seemed to stretch endlessly, like the store itself was warping around me. The fluorescent lights flickered, plunging parts of the store into darkness, and I could hear whispers echoing off the walls. I couldn't understand the words, but they sounded urgent, angry, and mocking all at once. I tried calling the manager on the walkie-talkie, but there was no response. My phone had no signal. The figure appeared again, closer this time, just at the end of the aisle. I swung my flashlight at it, but the beam passed through as if it were made of smoke. Its head tilted further, the impossible angle of its neck making my stomach turn. I stumbled backward into the back storage room, locking the door behind me. The whispers grew louder, circling the room, overlapping into a deafening cacophony. I pressed myself into a corner, trying to make myself as small as possible. Then I felt it. A cold, wet touch on my shoulder, like icy fingers brushing against my skin. I screamed, spinning around, but the room was empty. Hours passed, or maybe it was minutes. I couldn't tell. The lights flickered sporadically, the whispers occasionally dropping to a low guttural hiss, just enough to remind me it was still there. When the first faint light of dawn started leaking in through the windows, the presence finally receded. The air warmed slightly, the whispers stopped, and the figure vanished. I didn't wait to be sure. I ran out of the store, never looking back. I called my manager later that morning, quit over the phone, and never returned. Some nights I still dream of the figure, the tall, faceless thing gliding silently through endless aisles, its head tilted, always watching. I wake up sweating, heart racing, and I can still hear faint whispers calling my name, reminding me that it's patient and it's waiting. I haven't worked a night shift since. I never planned to, but the memory of that night stays with me. The shadows, the whispers, the cold, wet touch. It reminds me that some things don't need to follow doors or walls, they follow you. And sometimes, if you're alone at night, you can't escape. I took a job at the small, rural nursing home right after finishing college. It wasn't much, minimum wage, long hours, mostly nights, but I needed work, and the night shift paid a little extra. The building was an old structure, a 3-story brick building with peeling paint and an overgrown lawn built in the 1950s. By day, it looked like a sleepy, harmless place. But at night, it had a different energy, heavy and suffocating. I started on the night shift with another aide, Lisa, a kind older woman who had been there for over 20 years. She warned me about the old West Wing, which had been closed for renovations for months after a small fire. "Don't go there at night," she said. "The building remembers." I laughed it off, assuming she meant it metaphorically, but there was something in her voice I couldn't shake. The first few weeks were routine, checking on residents, making rounds, ensuring the alarms worked, noting any issues. But one night I was scheduled alone. Lisa had called out sick, and the night nurse was busy with paperwork in the main office. I didn't think much of it, just another quiet shift. It started around midnight. I was walking down the corridor on the second floor, flashlight in hand, checking rooms. Everything seemed normal. Doors closed, lights off, the hum of the old heating system filling the hall. But then I heard it. A faint tapping, like fingernails on wood, coming from the end of the hallway. I froze. The West Wing was closed and locked. There shouldn't have been anyone there. I called out, "Hello? Anyone there?" My voice sounded weak, swallowed by the long corridor. No answer. I told myself it was just a loose shutter rattling in the wind, but then the tapping stopped, replaced by soft footsteps. Slow, dragging. They didn't sound like a person walking normally. They were deliberate, heavy, echoing off the walls. My skin prickled. I shined the flashlight toward the West Wing doors, which were old and reinforced with metal. Nothing. But the air felt heavier there, colder, almost wet with the smell of something rotting. I tried to ignore it and continued my rounds, but the unease stayed with me. Every few minutes, I'd hear whispering, almost imperceptible, coming from the locked west wing. Don't leave. Stay. I told myself I was tired, imagining things, but my heart was racing. Around 2:30, I went to check on a new resident, an elderly man with dementia. His room was at the end of the hall, right near the west wing. When I knocked, he didn't answer. The door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open and froze. The room was empty, but his bed was neatly made, and on it was a small, pale handprint. Not a glove, not a smear, an actual handprint pressed into the fabric as if someone had reached out and touched it. I spun around. The hallway was empty. The whispering grew louder. Stay. Stay with us. My flashlight flickered, and in the brief darkness I saw movement, shadows shifting along the walls, forming shapes, thin, human-like, jerking unnaturally. I tried calling the nurse's office on the radio. Static. Every line was dead. My phone was dead too. I was completely alone. I ran down the hall, heart pounding, trying to reach the stairwell to the main lobby. But the west wing seemed to extend impossibly, the hall stretching longer than it should. Shadows hovered at the end, black figures with hollow eyes, faces twisted in smiles, floating just above the floor. One of them drifted toward me. Its hand reached out, thin fingers brushing my shoulder. Ice shot through me, burning like frostbite. I screamed and ran, slipping in the waxed floor, barely making it to the lobby. The front doors were locked, the alarm panel dead. The shadows gathered behind me, whispering, circling, waiting. In a panic, I ran to the supply closet, slammed the door, and crouched inside, breathing hard. The whispering continued, just outside the door, low and guttural. Stay, stay, stay. I didn't move until dawn, praying someone would come for me. When the day staff arrived, the building was normal again. The west wing doors were locked, empty, and all shadows gone. But I knew what I had felt. I quit that same day. I never worked nights again. I've never told anyone the full story. They'd think I was insane. But every time I pass a nursing home or an old building at night, I feel it. The cold weight, the whispers, the shadows just out of sight, waiting for someone to stay. Story the end. I had just started working the night shift at a small-town diner in rural Pennsylvania. It was the kind of place that never closed. A 24-hour diner stuck somewhere between the interstate and the edge of town. The owner, a woman named Betty, was friendly enough but a little eccentric. The kind of person who left cryptic notes on the bulletin board about always being careful at night. I laughed it off when she said it the first day, thinking she was just trying to be quirky. The first few nights were easy. Not much business after midnight, a few truckers stopping in for coffee, maybe a late-night student or two. The diner itself was old. It was up with vinyl booths that cracked when you sat down, and a long counter that had seen better days. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, and the kitchen always smelled faint stale of coffee. It was around 2 a.m. on my third night when things started to feel wrong. I was behind the counter, cleaning up and restocking sugar packets, when I heard a soft tapping from the dining area. At first, I thought it was a customer drumming their fingers on the table, but when I looked up, the booths were empty. I shook my head and went back to work, chalking it up to my imagination. A few minutes later, the tapping started again, this time from the kitchen door. I froze. The door to the kitchen was locked from the inside. I was the only one on shift. I approached slowly, my heart pounding, and looked through the small window in the door. Nothing. Empty kitchen. Pots and pans hanging from the walls, the fridge humming, but nobody there. I told myself it was nothing, maybe the old building settling. But the feeling of being watched started to creep over me. Every sound, the hum of the fridge, the buzz of the lights, the faint creak of the floorboards, made me jump. Around 2:45 a.m., I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming from the far end of the diner, the section furthest from the counter. I spun around, flashlight in hand, and aimed it down the empty aisle between the booths. No one. I checked the security monitors behind the counter. 4 cameras covered the main dining area and the entrances. Everything seemed normal. Empty booths, the parking lot outside deserted. I exhaled, trying to calm myself, but then I noticed something on the monitor for the back dining area. A figure. Tall, thin, dressed in dark clothing, standing perfectly still in the middle of the room, facing the camera. At first, I thought maybe it was a trick of the shadows or a reflection, but the figure didn't flicker or distort. It was there, solid, watching. I backed up, heart hammering, and grabbed the diner phone to call the police. But my hands were shaking so badly, I dropped it. When I picked it up again, the line was dead. I turned my attention back to the monitor. The figure was closer now, not moving like a person, more like gliding across the floor. I swallowed hard, tried to reason with myself. Maybe a worker had snuck in, maybe a prankster, but nothing made sense. There shouldn't have been anyone in the diner at this hour. Then I heard a whisper behind me. Soft, low, unintelligible, like someone speaking just at the edge of hearing. I spun around, flashlight sweeping the booths and corners. Nothing. But the whispering continued, moving, circling me, surrounding me. I ran to the kitchen door, thinking I could lock myself in. But as I reached for the handle, I saw it, another shadow right behind me in the reflection of the counter glass. I whipped around. Empty. The reflection was gone. My stomach dropped, and my breathing became ragged. The lights flickered violently, plunging the diner into near darkness. I could hear the sound of someone, or something, moving through the booths, dragging its feet, circling, whispering. The feeling of being watched was suffocating. I backed up against the counter, flashlight trembling in my hands. By 3:30 a.m., I was shaking uncontrollably. I tried to call Betty, but her number went straight to voicemail. The whispers had stopped, but the footsteps continued, slow, deliberate, dragging across the floor, coming closer. I could feel it, just beyond the counter, just out of sight, watching, waiting. At 4 a.m., the first early morning customers arrived, a couple of truckers, and the diner suddenly felt normal again. The lights steadied, the kitchen stopped humming unnaturally, and the shadows receded. But I knew what I had seen. I knew what I had felt. I quit the next day. Betty asked me why, and I just said I wasn't cut out for nights. But deep down, I knew it wasn't the work. It was that diner. That feeling of being watched, that dark figure that glided through the empty booths. Even now, years later, when I drive past that diner at night, I can't bring myself to look at it for too long, because sometimes, just sometimes, I think I see a shadow standing in the far corner of the dining room, head tilted, watching, waiting. Story the end. I was 27 when I landed a night shift job as a maintenance worker at an old manufacturing plant in rural Michigan. The plant had been abandoned for nearly a decade before a small company bought it to store surplus industrial equipment. The building was enormous, brick walls, rusted steel beams, and miles of empty hallways. It smelled of oil, dust, and mildew, and the air always felt thick and heavy. I took the job because it paid better than anything else I could find at the time, and honestly, I liked working alone. Quiet nights meant I could finish my tasks without interruption. But I quickly learned that quiet isn't always safe. The first night, I did my rounds, checking the machinery, inspecting the storage areas, and testing the alarm systems. Everything seemed normal until I passed the main hall, which stretched maybe 200 feet with rows of empty shelving and rusted equipment. That's when I heard it, a faint scraping sound, like metal dragging across concrete. I froze, listening. The sound stopped. I told myself it was probably a loose piece of machinery settling, but a cold sweat ran down my back. Over the next week, things got stranger. I'd hear footsteps echoing in hallways that were empty. I'd see shadows flicker just outside my peripheral vision, and when I turned to look, nothing was there. One night, I found a toolbox on the floor that I was sure I had left on a shelf. It wasn't knocked over or moved. It was completely untouched, except now it sat directly in my path. The cameras were useless. Most of them didn't function properly, and the ones that did only captured static. I tried to record audio, but playback always picked up only faint mechanical hums, never the noises I could hear with my own ears. I started carrying a flashlight everywhere, but even its beam didn't seem to penetrate the darkness fully. One night, around 3 a.m., I was in the far west wing checking storage racks when I heard someone whisper my name, Ethan. My blood ran cold. I spun around, nothing. I called out, but no one answered. The hairs on my neck stood on end, and I felt a pressure in the air, like something was watching me from the shadows. I told myself to leave and hurried back toward the main hall. That's when I saw it, a figure at the end of the hallway. It was tall, unnaturally thin, and completely black. No features. Its head tilted at an angle that no human neck could manage. It didn't move toward me, not at first. It just watched. I couldn't breathe. My flashlight flickered, and when it came back on, the figure had vanished. I didn't stop to think. I ran. After that night, I started noticing signs of it everywhere. Doors that I locked would be open when I returned. Boxes I stacked neatly were knocked over. The air would suddenly become icy, and my breath would cloud before me even though the heater was on. I stopped trying to rationalize it. There was no explanation, at least not one that made sense. One night I was checking the basement where the oldest machinery was stored. The lights flickered violently, and the shadows stretched across the walls like fingers. As I walked past a row of old metal cabinets, I felt a cold hand brush my shoulder. I spun around. Nothing. My flashlight flickered again, and I caught a glimpse of movement at the far end, a shadowy figure crouching, watching me. I tried to leave, but the building seemed to change. Hallways stretched longer than they should have. Doors that led to exits now opened into more hallways. The air grew heavier, and I could hear faint whispers, low and overlapping, chanting something I couldn't understand. My heartbeat echoed in my ears. I finally reached the main hall and ran to the exit doors. They were locked. I fumbled with the keys I always carried, my hands shaking violently. Then I heard it, a scraping, slow and deliberate, coming from behind me. I dared a glance and saw dozens of shadows moving along the walls, stretching, twisting, and converging toward me. Panic overtook me. I slammed the door open and ran into the freezing night. I quit the job the next day. I didn't even tell the company why. I packed my things and left, and I've never returned. Friends laughed when I described what happened, chalking it up to exhaustion or my imagination. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt. Years later, I learned that the building had a dark history. Before it was a warehouse, it had been a factory where multiple workers had died in mysterious accidents. People said the place was haunted, but I never believed in ghosts until that night. The thing I saw, that presence, wasn't human. It didn't belong to this world. And I know, even now, that it's still there, waiting for the next person foolish enough to wander its hallways at night. I'll never work a night shift again. I can't. And sometimes when I'm alone in my apartment, I hear faint footsteps echoing through the rooms. Slow, deliberate, like the shadowy figure is still following me. It never leaves. Story the end. I was working the night shift at the gas station on the edge of town, the kind of place where the neon lights flicker like they're about to die, and the hum of the refrigerators never stops. I had taken the job because I needed the money. But by the second week, I realized there was something off about this place, something that didn't make sense until it was too late. The first night had been quiet. A few late drivers came through, bought snacks or a pack of cigarettes, and left. But as the hours stretched past midnight, I started noticing oddities. Doors I was sure I had locked would be open when I turned back. Shelves would be slightly out of place. I chalked it up to fatigue. The nights were long, and the fluorescent lights were harsh and unrelenting. Then the noises started. Soft at first, the faint tap of footsteps behind the shelves, rustling like someone moving through the store. I checked the cameras. Nothing. I told myself it was just rats, maybe a raccoon that had found its way inside. But the next night, it got worse. I was stocking the coolers when I heard a whisper, low, urgent, coming from the back of the store. "Go," it said. I froze. My hands shook. I called the night manager, but no one answered. My phone had no signal. I walked slowly to the back room, flashlight in hand. The air was cold, too cold for summer, and smelled faintly of mildew. I opened the door. Nothing, just empty boxes and the hum of the freezer. Then I saw it, a small figure, crouched behind a stack of crates, pale and thin, staring at me. Its head was tilted unnaturally, eyes too dark, too hollow to be real. I blinked. When I opened my eyes, it was gone. After that, every night became worse. The figure appeared at random, sometimes on the cameras, sometimes just out of the corner of my eye. Shelves would be knocked over, displays ransacked, and the whispers grew louder, almost constant. I couldn't ignore them. I started locking myself in the office, hoping it would stay away. One night, around 3 a.m., I was sitting at the counter when I heard scratching on the glass doors. Tap, tap, tap. I froze. The store was empty, or so I thought. I glanced outside, nothing but the parking lot, empty, except for my car. Then I saw it, a shadow moving along the edge of the lot, slow, deliberate. My heart raced. I grabbed the phone and dialed 911. No answer. The scratching continued, moving around the building, circling me. I backed into the office, trying to keep the doors between me and whatever it was. That's when the whispers became screams, high-pitched, desperate, echoing off the walls. I could feel it in my chest, vibrating through my bones. Then the office door shook violently. Something was trying to get in. My flashlight flickered. I could see its reflection in the glass, small, pale, hollow eyes, and a smile that didn't reach its face. I stumbled back, tripping over the chair, my breath coming in short gasps. I ran toward the back exit, hoping to get out, but the figure was there, just at the end of the hall. It didn't move quickly, but it didn't need to. Its presence was heavy, oppressive, like the air itself was pressing down on me. I finally reached the door, threw it open, and ran into the night. The figure didn't follow, at least not in sight, but I could feel it, waiting, just beyond the glow of the streetlight. I drove home without stopping, hands shaking on the wheel, adrenaline keeping me moving faster than I thought possible. I quit the next day, told myself I'd been imagining things, that the stress and the long nights had gotten to me. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. And sometimes when I drive past that gas station, I can see it standing just inside, in the shadows, watching, waiting for the next person to be alone at night. I still have nightmares. The whispering never stops completely. It's always there, low in the back of my mind, telling me to leave before it's too late. Story the end. It was a late Tuesday night when I started my shift at the convenience store on the edge of a quiet suburban street in Michigan. The kind of store that rarely saw more than a few customers after 10, except for the occasional trucker or college kid. I'd worked nights there for nearly a year, and while it could be lonely, it was never particularly scary. Until that night. I clocked in at 10:45 p.m. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the automatic doors opened with a sluggish whine. Immediately, the air felt heavier than usual, almost like it was pressing against my chest. I shook it off and started my usual routine, stocking shelves, checking the cash register, and straightening displays. Around 11:30, the first customer walked in. A man, maybe late 30s, wearing a dark hoodie. He moved slowly, glancing around like he was making sure no one was watching him. He bought a single bottle of water, didn't speak, and left as quietly as he came. Nothing unusual, at first. I returned to restocking the snack aisle and noticed something in the security monitors. A figure, dark and thin, standing near the frozen food section. At first, I thought it was the guy who had just left, but when I checked the cameras outside, the parking lot was empty. I walked down the aisle cautiously. The figure wasn't there. I looked back at the monitor, and it had moved closer to the aisle where I had just been. A chill ran down my spine. I tried to tell myself it was fatigue or a trick of the cameras. I decided to check the back storage area to make sure all doors were locked. That's when I heard it, the faintest whisper right behind me saying, "Don't turn around." I froze. My heart was racing. Slowly, I turned, scanning the empty store. Nothing. But the whisper came again, louder this time. "You can't leave." Panic set in. I ran to the front door to see if I could get out. The automatic doors refused to open. I tried the emergency exit. Locked. Everywhere I went, the store seemed to stretch unnaturally. Aisles that should have taken 10 seconds to walk now seemed endless. The shadows in the corners began to shift. I could hear them moving, gliding over the tiles, whispering unintelligible things that sounded like my name. I grabbed a broom from the cleaning closet and swung it at one of the shadows. It didn't move like it was hit. It just recoiled slightly, almost as if offended, and then continued toward me. I ran to the back office and locked the door. The shadows pooled outside the glass windows, tall, impossibly thin, their heads tilted at grotesque angles. I could hear scratching at the door, claws against metal, and the whispers became a chorus, overlapping and mocking me. I backed into a corner, phone in hand, dialing 911. No dial tone. My fingers shook as I tried to call my manager. Still nothing. The shadows seemed to press closer, their presence filling the office, cold and wet like condensation, like ice against my skin. Hours, or maybe minutes, passed. The shadows didn't move, they just watched. Then slowly, as if responding to the first light of dawn, they began to recede. The whispers faded, and the oppressive cold lifted. I waited until I could hear the morning traffic outside before opening the door and stepping into daylight. I didn't return that night. I quit the job the next day, never telling anyone exactly what I had experienced. Some nights, though, I still see movement out of the corner of my eye. I hear faint whispers when I'm alone, soft and distant, calling my name, reminding me that some things don't need doors to follow you. Even years later, I avoid night shifts entirely. I lock my doors, check my windows, and never stay out after midnight, because I know what waits in the darkness, patient and silent, and I know that once it notices you, there's no running fast enough. Story the end. I was hired as a security guard at an industrial storage facility on the outskirts of town. It was a sprawling compound surrounded by high fences and floodlights that never fully reached the far corners. The day shifts were busy enough, with workers moving in and out, trucks rolling up and down the driveways, alarms sounding occasionally. But the night shift was different. By 11 o'clock, the entire place was silent, except for the hum of a few running machines and the occasional squeal of metal against metal. I liked quiet, I thought I did, until the night I realized I was not alone. I had been working the night shift for a few weeks. Most nights were dull, walking the perimeter, checking cameras, logging activity. But that night in late October, something felt off from the moment I arrived. The main gate was slightly ajar, though I was sure I had closed it properly the night before. My flashlight cut across the yard, illuminating rows of shipping containers stacked like dark monoliths. Something about the shadows they cast felt alive. I started my routine, patrolling the grounds, checking doors, and noting the locked gates. About an hour into my shift, I thought I saw movement between the containers, just a flicker at first. My heart skipped. I called out, "Hello? Anyone there?" Silence. The movement was gone. I shook my head, convincing myself it was a stray animal or the wind shifting something. Then I heard the first sound I knew wasn't normal, a whisper, faint, almost imperceptible, coming from somewhere behind the containers. "Don't leave. Stay." I froze, gripping my flashlight. The yard was empty. The lights on the poles illuminated everything I could see, but the darkness between containers seemed deeper, heavier, as if it was swallowing the light. I tried calling the office on the radio. Nothing. Static. My backup phone was dead. I was completely alone. I started moving toward the far corner of the lot, flashlight scanning, trying to convince myself I was imagining things. That's when I noticed footprints in the gravel, bare feet, small, childlike. They led from one container to another, then vanished. My stomach twisted. No one was supposed to be here. The main gate was locked. No deliveries were scheduled. As I followed the trail cautiously, I heard the whispering again, closer this time. "Stay with us." I spun around. Shadows moved between the containers, but no one was there. The air grew colder, heavier, almost wet, and my breath fogged in front of me, even though it was late October. Then I saw her. A girl, maybe 8 or 9, standing at the far end of the yard, pale, thin, hair matted, wearing a dirty dress that looked decades old. Her eyes were dark hollows, and she was smiling, slowly, unnaturally. She didn't move like a living person. She glided across the gravel, her feet barely touching the ground. I froze. My flashlight flickered. When it came back on, she was closer. Another figure appeared behind her, another child and another, until the lot seemed full of them. All pale, all smiling, all staring, whispering in unison, "Stay, stay, stay." I ran, heart pounding, trying to reach the main gate. The shadows followed, moving impossibly fast, slipping between containers. One of them reached out, a thin, cold hand that brushed my shoulder. Ice burned through me. I stumbled, fell, and scrambled back to my feet. My flashlight rolled away, cutting the yard into complete darkness. I didn't stop running until I reached my car, parked just outside the gate. I jumped in, locked the doors, and started the engine. I glanced in the rearview mirror. The lot was empty again. The gate was closed, the containers motionless. No children, no shadows, nothing. But the feeling didn't leave me, that heavy, suffocating presence, and the whispering echoing in my ears. I quit that job the next day. I never returned at night. Even now, years later, when I drive past industrial lots or large storage facilities after dark, I feel it. The cold brush of a hand, the flicker of shadows at the edge of vision, and faint, whispered voices telling me to stay. Story. The end. The first time I ever worked the night shift alone, I told myself it would be easy money. I was 23 years old, broke, and grateful for any paycheck. The job was at a small 24-hour gas station just outside of a medium-sized town in the Midwest. I'd been there for about 2 months before they decided I was trustworthy enough to handle the midnight to 8 a.m. shift by myself. I thought it was going to be boring, but harmless. Quiet nights, the hum of refrigerators, maybe a drunk customer or two. That was all I expected. I had no idea how quickly that illusion would shatter. The place itself was old, the kind of gas station that had once been part of a bigger chain but was sold off years ago and now existed as a stubborn relic, kept alive by a local owner who didn't want to let it go. The aisles were short and cramped, the shelves stocked with cheap chips, candy, and off-brand sodas. The coffee machine was always sputtering, the floor tiles always sticky. I never thought of it as creepy, just kind of rundown. The night I'm about to describe didn't start out any different than the others. I clocked in at midnight sharp. The guy I was relieving, Dave, was already half out the door. He always seemed in a rush to leave when the clock struck 12. He gave me the same parting words he always did. "Don't let the freaks get to you." And then left, not even looking back. The first 2 hours were quiet. A trucker came in around 12:30 for coffee, and a group of college kids stopped in for snacks around 1:15, clearly drunk but harmless. By 2 a.m., the store was empty, and the silence set in. Silence is different at night. It presses down on you, makes you notice every sound you normally ignore. The hum of the coolers, the faint buzz of the fluorescent lights, the occasional creak in the ceiling. I tried to distract myself by restocking shelves and wiping down the counter. Around 2:30, I went outside for a quick smoke break. The lot was empty, the highway that ran past the station quiet, except for the occasional headlights. The air felt heavy, like it was holding something back. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. I scanned the lot, the tree line beyond the pumps, but saw nothing. I shrugged it off and went back inside. It was around 3 a.m. when I noticed the first strange thing. I was behind the counter, scrolling mindlessly on my phone, when I heard the bell that chimes whenever the door opens. I looked up instantly, but no one was there. The door was closed. I thought maybe I had imagined it, so I got up and checked the entrance. Sure enough, the door was locked tight, no breeze, no sign of anyone outside. That put me on edge. I went back behind the counter and sat down again, trying to shake it off. But not 10 minutes later, I heard something else. The unmistakable sound of shuffling footsteps in the aisle behind me. My stomach dropped. I got up slowly, turned around, and peered down the snack aisle. Nothing. The shelves sat quiet, the lights buzzed overhead. I walked down the aisle anyway, checking each row, each corner. Still nothing. When I got back to the counter, I felt a little stupid. Maybe I was just letting my imagination run away with me. I tried to brush it off, but the feeling wouldn't go away. It was like the air had shifted, heavier somehow, and every instinct I had was telling me something was wrong. By 3:45, I was jumpy enough that every sound made me flinch. That's when I saw it, the security monitor. We had an old system of 4 cameras, one outside covering the pumps, one pointing at the front door, and 2 inside aimed at different aisles. I glanced at the monitors, more out of habit than suspicion, and froze. On the screen showing aisle 3, there was someone standing there. At first, I thought maybe a customer had slipped in when I wasn't looking, but that didn't make sense. I'd been watching the door, and the bell hadn't gone off again since earlier. I leaned closer to the monitor, my chest tight. The figure was tall, thin, dressed in dark clothing. The image quality was grainy, but I could see enough to tell that the person was just standing still, facing the camera. Not moving, not shopping, just standing there. I swallowed hard and grabbed the flashlight we kept under the counter. My hand was trembling as I walked toward aisle 3. The whole time I told myself it had to be a glitch in the camera. Maybe an old recording looping by mistake, something technical. But when I turned the corner into aisle 3, it was empty. Completely empty. I walked the length of the aisle, shining the flashlight into every corner. Nobody. My skin crawled. When I got back to the counter, I stared at the monitor again. The figure was gone. I sat there for a long time, gripping the flashlight in my hand like it was the only thing keeping me safe. The silence in the store felt different now. Tighter, heavier, I couldn't stop watching the monitors. Every flicker of static made my pulse race. At 4:10, the outside camera caught something. A shape at the edge of the lot, just beyond the reach of the lights. It looked like a person standing near the tree line. The image was too blurry to make out details, but I could see the outline. Tall, thin, unmoving, just like before. I froze, staring at the screen. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, half hidden in the dark. I didn't want to go outside, but I couldn't just sit there either. I picked up the store phone and called the only number I had for emergencies, the local sheriff's department. When I explained that I thought someone was hanging around the station, they said they'd send a deputy to swing by. The wait for that deputy felt endless. I kept watching the monitor, and the figure didn't move. Then, just as the headlights of a cruiser appeared down the road, the figure was gone. The deputy searched the lot, the tree line, even walked through the store with me. He found nothing. He gave me a look that said he thought I was jumpy, maybe overtired, and told me to call again if I saw anything. Then he left. After that, I seriously considered locking the door and refusing to let anyone in until sunrise, but the owner was strict about staying open. So I stayed at my post, every nerve in my body on edge. At 4:45, things got worse. I heard it again. The footsteps. This time they were louder, heavier. I spun around, shining the flashlight down the aisles. Nothing. Then I glanced at the monitors. On the inside camera, aisle 2 this time, the figure was back, standing perfectly still, facing the camera. My throat went dry. I had just walked that aisle less than 5 minutes ago. There was no way someone could have slipped past me. I wanted to run. I wanted to quit right there. But something in me froze, rooted me to the spot. I kept watching the monitor. And then, slowly, the figure began to move. It didn't walk like a normal person. It sort of glided, jerky, like the camera was skipping frames. It moved toward the end of the aisle, closer to the camera. But when I glanced up from the monitor to the actual aisle, it was still empty. I looked back at the screen, and the figure was now standing at the very end of the aisle, just a few feet from where the camera was mounted. Its head tilted slightly, as if it knew I was watching. Then the screen went black. All 4 monitors flickered and cut to static. I nearly dropped the flashlight. I backed against the wall, my chest heaving. The only sound was the buzz of the lights overhead and the faint ringing in my ears. For the next 20 minutes, I stood there in paralyzed silence, the flashlight beam shaking in my hand. Eventually, the monitors flickered back to life. All 4 feeds showed their usual empty scenes. No figure, no static, just normal. I didn't move until the first light of dawn began to seep through the front windows. When Dave came in to relieve me at 8 a.m., I must have looked pale as a ghost. He gave me a long look and said, "You saw it, didn't you?" My blood went cold. I asked him what he meant, but he just shook his head. "You'll figure it out if you keep working here, or you'll quit before it gets worse." That was all he said. He clocked in, grabbed his coffee, and acted like nothing happened. I didn't quit right away. I needed the money too badly. But after 3 more shifts where similar things happened, figures on the cameras that weren't really there, footsteps in empty aisles, the feeling of being watched, I couldn't take it anymore. I left that job without even giving notice. And to this day, whenever I drive past that old gas station, I can't bring myself to look at it too long. Because deep down, I know that if I did, I'd see someone standing there in the window watching me. Story the end. The night shift at the warehouse had always been quiet for me. I worked in a distribution center just outside of a small American town in Indiana, the kind of place where most of the houses had shutters purely for decoration, and the downtown strip still had a diner that hadn't changed since the 1960s. I started working there when I was 22, and at first I thought it was a blessing. I had dropped out of college, was in debt, and couldn't land anything decent. So when I was offered the job, I grabbed it without hesitation. The night shift wasn't glamorous, but it paid better than days, and with most people sleeping while I worked, there was something calm about it, at least in the beginning. The warehouse was massive, a sprawling metal building filled with rows upon rows of shelves stacked high with boxes. During the day, it buzzed with forklifts, voices, and constant activity. But at night, it was different. Only a skeleton crew worked those hours, maybe 3 or 4 of us scattered across the entire place. The silence in that building was like nothing else. No cars passing outside, no voices, just the hum of the overhead lights and the occasional clang of a pallet jack echoing too loud. I usually worked with an older guy named Roy, who had been there for years, and a younger woman, Sarah, who always kept her headphones in. We were all pretty much left alone to do our own tasks, checking inventory, moving pallets, loading up shipments for the trucks that came in the early morning. It wasn't a bad setup, but then came the nights when I was scheduled alone. It wasn't supposed to happen often, but sometimes someone called out or the scheduling was thin and I'd end up in the warehouse by myself. The first time it happened, I remember thinking it wouldn't be that bad. I liked being alone, and the thought of just zoning out with the radio playing sounded fine. But once midnight hit and the building seemed to press in around me with all that dark silence, I started to understand why everyone hated being left alone there. The thing about a warehouse that size is that it never feels completely empty. No matter where you are, there are too many blind corners, too many shadows between the shelves, too many places someone could be standing just out of sight. The fluorescent lights overhead left gaps, little pools of darkness that stretched down the aisles, and every sound seemed exaggerated. A dropped box could echo all the way across the building, making it feel like someone was there when you knew they weren't. The night that changed everything started in late October. It was cold, the kind of cold where your breath fogs in the air even indoors. I had just clocked in at 11, and my manager, who looked almost apologetic, told me I'd be alone that night. Roy had called out sick, and Sarah had quit the week before. I shrugged it off, even joked about how at least I didn't have to make small talk. But once the manager left and the heavy door closed behind him, the sound echoed down the vast building, and I felt that tight, uneasy silence settle in. I tried to keep busy, pushing a pallet jack through the aisles, humming to myself, but every now and then I'd hear something faint. A scrape, like something shifting. At first I thought it was just the building settling. Warehouses make noises, metal creaks, fans kick on, boxes shift slightly if stacked too high. But this felt different. It wasn't random. It almost had rhythm, like footsteps. I paused near aisle 16, holding the handle of the pallet jack, listening hard. It stopped when I stopped. I even called out, half joking, "Hello? Anybody else working late?" My voice sounded small, bouncing back to me in the hollow aisles. No answer. I shook my head, laughed it off, and kept moving. But I couldn't shake it. Every time I turned down a new aisle, I felt watched. Not like the security cameras, they were too high, too distant, but closer, like someone was just ducking behind the shelves every time I looked. I tried to be rational. Maybe I was just spooking myself. It was late, the place was creepy, and I'd been up since early. But then, around 1 a.m, I heard something that made my blood run cold. A laugh. It wasn't loud, not a full belly laugh, but a quiet, breathy chuckle. And it was close. So close that I froze in place and whipped my head around, expecting someone to be standing right behind me. But there was no one. Just rows of silent shelves stretching into the dim distance. My heart was pounding in my throat, and I told myself, no way. That was the radio. Or my imagination. Just tired. But then it happened again. A little louder this time, coming from aisle 19, just a few rows down from where I stood. It was unmistakable. Someone was laughing in the warehouse. I wanted to believe it was a prank. Maybe Roy had snuck in to mess with me. But the more I thought about it, the less sense it made. He'd been sick, and he sure wasn't the type to drive out in the middle of the night just to spook me. Besides, I didn't hear any doors open. The front door was heavy, and when it closed, you could hear it across the whole building. I grabbed the metal flashlight we kept at the check-in desk and made myself walk toward aisle 19. My boots echoed on the concrete, and the beam of light cut across the shelves, throwing long shadows. I turned the corner fast, hoping to catch someone before they hid, but the aisle was empty. Still, the boxes on the lower shelves looked disturbed, like something had brushed against them recently. One was even tilted off its pallet. I crouched, touched it. The cardboard was warm. That didn't make sense. It should have been cool like everything else in that freezing building. The laugh came again, softer, right behind me this time. I spun so fast I nearly fell. My flashlight beam swung across the aisle, hitting nothing. Absolutely nothing. But my gut screamed that someone had been standing there, close enough to breathe on my neck. I didn't even realize my hands were shaking until I saw the jittering beam of light. I told myself to calm down, to think. I decided to walk the entire warehouse, aisle by aisle, just to prove to myself I was alone. It took almost an hour, and with every step, the silence grew heavier. I didn't hear the laugh again during that sweep, and when I finished, I tried convincing myself I'd imagined the whole thing. But then at around 3, I went to the loading dock to prepare for an incoming truck. When I rolled open the heavy dock door, I froze. Footprints. In the thin layer of frost that had settled outside, there were fresh footprints leading directly up to the dock. Bare feet. The sight of them made me feel sick. They weren't faint either. I could see the toes, the arches. Whoever it was had walked barefoot in the freezing cold up to the warehouse, and the tracks stopped right at the dock door. No prints leading away, just ending there, as if whoever made them had stepped inside. I backed up, heart hammering. That laugh echoed in my head again, faint but sharp, like it had embedded itself into the silence. I slammed the dock door shut, locked it, and tried to steady my breathing. I didn't see anyone else the rest of that night, but I felt them. Every time I turned my back, I felt eyes on me. Every time I bent to lift a box, I imagined someone standing just behind me. By the time morning came, I was practically running for the exit. I told myself it had to have been a trick of the mind. Stress, lack of sleep. But over the next few weeks, it got worse. Whenever I was alone, I'd hear that same laugh, always faint, always just out of sight. Things would be moved when I wasn't looking. Boxes shifted, clipboards missing, tools out of place. One night, I found the break room microwave turned on with nothing inside, just running, the digital clock frozen at 3 a.m. And then came the night when I saw it. I was in aisle 23, scanning inventory with my flashlight, when I looked up toward the far end of the aisle. For a split second, I saw someone step from one row into the next. It was quick, almost a blur, but I caught it. A tall figure, thin, with shoulders hunched forward unnaturally. And what chilled me most was the sound it made as it moved, bare feet slapping against the concrete. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't work. I just stood there, breathing hard, flashlight shaking in my hand. Finally, I forced myself to move toward where I saw it. Every instinct screamed not to, but I had to know. When I reached the end of the aisle, I shined the light across the next row. Nothing. Empty. But the air felt warmer there, like someone had just passed through. And faintly, under the hum of the lights, I heard it. Breathing. Slow, raspy breathing. That was the night I knew it wasn't my imagination. Something else was in that warehouse with me, and it wasn't another worker. I wish I could say I quit then and there, but I didn't. I needed the money. I convinced myself I could handle it, that maybe it wouldn't bother me if I ignored it. But the more nights I worked alone, the bolder it became. The laugh grew louder, the footsteps closer, the breathing almost constant. And then one night in December, it finally touched me. I was crouched, moving a heavy box off a pallet, when I felt fingers ice cold, thin, bony, brush against the back of my neck. I shot up so fast I knocked the box over. My flashlight beam swung wildly, but there was nothing there, just empty air, empty aisles. But the skin on my neck burned where I felt it, and I knew I hadn't imagined it. That was the last shift I ever worked alone. I told my manager I couldn't do nights anymore. I didn't give details, I knew how crazy it would sound, but I never set foot in that warehouse after dark again. And sometimes even now, years later, when I'm walking alone at night or standing in a quiet room, I swear I hear it. That same laugh. Low, breathy, too close. Story the end. I was 26 when I started working the night shift at a nursing home just outside of Dayton, Ohio. It wasn't my dream job, but it paid better than the diner shifts I'd been juggling. And after a long string of financial screw-ups, I needed something steady. The place was called Pine Oak Care Center, though most of the staff just called it The Oak. The building was old, built in the late 1950s, and though they had renovated the main lobby and painted the walls a lighter color, you couldn't hide the bones of the place. Long, echoing hallways, linoleum floors that seemed permanently scuffed, no matter how many times they were buffed, and heavy wooden doors with squeaky hinges. The ceilings were low, and the fluorescent lights hummed just enough to get under your skin if you stood still too long. The first thing you learn working nights is that everything feels different in the dark, especially places designed for people who are nearing the end of their lives. The residents slept in their rooms, though slept is a generous word. Many of them cried out randomly, talked in their sleep, or called for nurses without realizing it. On my second night, I heard someone say, "Don't let him in this faint, quivering voice that echoed down the hall. When I peeked in, the old man was asleep, his eyes moving rapidly beneath his lids. There were only 3 of us working the night shift in my wing. Me, another aide named Cynthia, and a nurse named Gloria, who had been there for over 20 years. Gloria was the kind of person who didn't scare easily. She'd seen every kind of death you could imagine. Cynthia, on the other hand, had only been working there a few months longer than me. She had a nervous laugh and a habit of wringing her hands when she got scared, which was often. She once admitted that she hated walking down the hall to the storage closet at the far end because it always felt colder than the rest of the building. My first week was mostly uneventful. Checking on residents, changing bedding, sitting at the desk, filling out paperwork. But then things started happening. Small things at first. One night, I was making rounds and heard what sounded like someone shuffling just behind me. I turned quickly, expecting to see Cynthia, but the hallway was empty. Another time, I heard a loud bang from a resident's room, rushed in, and found nothing on the floor. The resident, an elderly woman with dementia, was staring at the wall and whispering something I couldn't understand. I told Gloria about it, half expecting her to laugh it off, but instead she just shrugged and said, "You'll get used to it. This place holds on to things." That answer didn't make me feel better. By the second month, the uneasiness had dug its claws into me. One night, around 3 a.m, I was doing my rounds in the East Wing, the quietest part of the building. As I walked past room 112, I heard breathing. Heavy, labored breathing. That wouldn't have been unusual if the room hadn't been empty. The resident who lived there had died 2 weeks earlier. I froze, listening. The sound was coming from the bed. I forced myself to step inside, telling myself it was my imagination. The bed was made tightly, the way housekeeping left it. The room smelled faintly of disinfectant and old wood. The breathing stopped the second I stepped through the doorway. My skin prickled with goosebumps, and I backed out slowly, refusing to turn my back until I was in the hallway again. Later that shift, Cynthia came up to me pale as paper. "Did you go into 112? She asked. When I nodded, she whispered, Don't. Weird stuff happens in there." I pressed her for details, but she shook her head and muttered, "Ask Gloria?" When I finally worked up the nerve to ask Gloria, she sighed and rubbed her eyes. "We've had trouble in that room for years. Some staff won't even go in. Lights flickering, call button going off when nobody's there, shadows moving. A few residents who stayed in that room would scream at night, saying someone was standing over their bed. That stuck with me. Someone, not something. Someone. I thought maybe they were just stories to spook new employees, but then I had my own experience. It was about a week later. I was walking past 112 again when I heard the call light chime from inside. I froze. The red light above the door was glowing. With a pit in my stomach, I opened the door. The room was empty, exactly as before, but the call button was lit up at the bedside. I reached over and pressed reset. The light went off. I stepped back into the hall, and less than 5 seconds later, the chime sounded again. The light was on. I didn't touch it that time. I just backed away, breathing fast, and hurried to the nurse's station. Gloria gave me a look like she already knew what had happened. She didn't even ask. She just muttered, "I told them to seal that damn room." Things escalated after that. I started noticing strange figures in my peripheral vision. Once, while charting at the desk, I saw a tall, thin shadow move across the end of the hallway, blocking the light for just a second before disappearing. Another time, I was helping Cynthia transfer a resident when I felt someone tap me on the shoulder. I spun around, but there was no one there. Cynthia saw the look on my face and whispered, "You felt it too?" The worst was when I was alone. Around 4 a.m., the halls were so still it felt like the air itself had died. That's when I'd hear things, soft footsteps behind me, the faint sound of someone sighing in an empty corridor, even laughter once. High-pitched, childlike laughter, echoing faintly from the east wing. We didn't have any children in the building. I kept telling myself it was stress, lack of sleep, maybe the building settling. But there were moments that broke through any rational explanation. Like the night I went to the supply closet that Cynthia hated. I needed extra linens, and as soon as I stepped inside, the door slammed shut behind me. The air turned icy, so cold I could see my breath. Then, from the corner of the small room, I heard a whisper. "Get out." I bolted, slamming my shoulder into the door until it flew open, nearly toppling me into the hall. My heart pounded so hard I thought I'd pass out. Cynthia was at the desk when I returned, and when she saw my face, she didn't even ask. She just nodded and said, "Told you." I tried to stick it out. The pay was good and I needed the job. But things got worse. Residents started complaining about a man standing in their rooms at night. One woman screamed so loud we rushed in thinking she was falling out of bed, only for her to sob that someone had been whispering in her ear. A man with late-stage Alzheimer's, who hadn't spoken clearly in months, suddenly looked at me one night and said, "He's right behind you." That night I felt it too, a presence, cold and pressing against my back. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. I just muttered, "Please leave me alone," and backed out of the room. The final straw came 3 months into the job. It was late February, snow piled outside the windows, the kind of night where the world feels muted. I was doing my rounds alone when I passed 112 again. The door was open, though we always kept it closed. Against my better judgment, I peeked inside. The bed was unmade, as if someone had been lying in it, and in the corner near the window stood a figure. Tall, dark, featureless. My body locked up. The thing shifted, almost leaning forward, and I swear I heard it breathe. I don't remember deciding to run, but the next thing I knew, I was at the nurse's station, panting, telling Gloria what I'd seen. She didn't question me. She just said, "That's it. You're not going back in that room." I lasted another 2 weeks before I quit. The job wasn't worth the nights of terror, the constant dread, the feeling that something unseen was stalking the halls of that nursing home. Even now, years later, I still dream about those nights. I dream about that whisper in the supply closet, that laughter in the hall, and that dark figure waiting in room 112. And sometimes, when I wake up in the middle of the night, I swear I hear breathing in the corner of my own room. Story the end. It was a little after 11 at night when I pulled into the cracked, weed-choked parking lot of the convenience store. The fluorescent lights above the windows flickered, buzzing like hornets in the quiet air, casting that sickly white glow over everything. The place wasn't in the best part of town, tucked between a long-abandoned laundromat and a liquor store that somehow still clung to life. I'd been working the night shift there for about 6 months, and by then I'd gotten used to the strange rhythm of the hours, dead quiet stretches broken by the occasional drunk staggering in, or a trucker needing caffeine and cigarettes to keep rolling down the highway. The store wasn't 24 hours by design. It was barely hanging on financially. But the owner had figured the overnight hours might cover rent if nothing else. And I needed the money. I was 24, broke, and living in a rundown apartment with bills stacking up faster than I could pay them. It wasn't a glamorous job, but it was a job. The air inside smelled faintly of bleach and stale hot dogs. The buzzing fluorescent tubes overhead made me feel like I was standing under an interrogation light. I clocked in, waved to Charlie, who had worked the evening shift and was eager to get home, and settled behind the counter. As soon as he walked out, I was alone. There was a certain loneliness that came with working nights. After midnight, the world outside went quiet. Cars became rare, people rarer. You sat in that glass box, brightly lit and visible from the street, while the rest of the world slept. You started to notice every shadow, every little sound, and once you noticed, it was hard not to let your imagination run with it. I had my routine: wipe down the counter, restock the cooler, watch the clock crawl toward sunrise. That night started like any other. A woman came in around midnight, bought a pack of cigarettes, didn't make eye contact. A pair of kids, maybe 18, stumbled in half drunk a little after. They grabbed energy drinks and left giggling. Then nothing, just the hum of the refrigerators, the faint smell of burnt coffee. It must have been close to 1:30 when I noticed something outside. At first, it was just a movement in the corner of my eye. I looked up, expecting to see a car pulling in, but there was nothing. Just the parking lot, empty, except for my beat-up Corolla and one flickering street lamp. I shrugged it off, went back to scanning through my phone, but a few minutes later, there it was again, movement, just at the edge of the glass doors. This time, I looked up fast, but again, nothing. Just night air and shadows. My stomach tightened a little, that old primal instinct whispering that something was out there, watching. I told myself it was just nerves or maybe a stray cat. The neighborhood had plenty of those. But still, I found myself standing a little straighter behind the counter, listening harder. The store was too quiet. When the cooler shut off for its cycle, the silence pressed in heavy. Then came the knock. It was soft, deliberate on the glass door. I jerked my head up. No one was there. I froze, my ears straining. I could have sworn I heard it again. Tap, tap, tap. My heart picked up. I walked around the counter, trying to act like I wasn't rattled, and approached the doors. The parking lot was empty. The street lamp flickered, buzzing. I stood there staring out into the darkness, my reflection staring back at me from the glass. For a second, I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. I was about to turn back when I noticed something odd. On the glass, near the bottom of the door, there was a smear, like a greasy handprint. The thing was, it was small. Too small for an adult. I wiped it off with a rag, shaking my head. Probably kids messing around. But the back of my neck prickled. I went back behind the counter and tried to distract myself. But every few minutes I found my eyes drifting back to the glass doors. The sense of being watched was stronger now. My hands wouldn't stop fidgeting. Around 2, a pickup truck pulled in. Relief washed through me. A guy in work boots and a baseball cap came inside, grabbed a coffee and a bag of beef jerky. We exchanged a few words, and as soon as he left, I wished he'd stayed longer. His presence had grounded me. The moment he drove off, the quiet settled back like a heavy blanket. That was when I heard it again. Tap, tap, tap. This time from the side window. I turned so fast I nearly dropped the pen I was holding. The window was dark, nothing beyond it but the faint outline of the liquor store next door. But I knew I'd heard it. The sound was too clear, too intentional. I stayed rooted there, my breath shallow, until a sudden crash made me jump. It came from the back of the store, metal clattering like a shelf falling. My legs carried me toward it before my brain even caught up. I pushed open the door to the stockroom, flicked on the light. Nothing. The shelves were intact, the boxes stacked the same as before. But the noise had been real. I wasn't losing it. My skin crawled. I backed out of the stockroom and locked the door behind me as if that flimsy lock could do anything. When I got back to the counter, my heart sank. On the glass door, right where I'd wiped earlier, was another handprint. This one was higher, smudged across the glass, and it was still too small. I called the police. My voice shook a little as I explained that someone might be messing around outside the store, knocking on the windows. The dispatcher sounded bored, told me they'd send a car to swing by. I waited. 5 minutes. 10. No sign of a patrol car. But I did notice something else, movement again, just beyond the glow of the street lamp. It looked like a figure, small, standing still, facing the store. I blinked, and it was gone. That was when I realized how badly my hands were trembling. I locked the doors, though policy said I wasn't supposed to. I didn't care. I sat behind the counter, clutching the phone, staring at those glass doors like they were about to burst open. The police never came. The rest of the night stretched on like a fever dream. Every so often I'd hear it. Knock, knock, knock. Sometimes on the door, sometimes the side windows. Once from the back door to the stockroom. I didn't dare go check. At one point, I heard what sounded like giggling, high-pitched, faint, right outside. By the time the sky began to lighten around 6, I was sitting stiff in the chair, my eyes burning from not blinking enough. The knocking had stopped sometime before dawn. The parking lot looked empty, ordinary. When Charlie came in to relieve me, I almost hugged him. I tried to tell him what happened, but he just gave me a look like I was overworked or losing it. Maybe I was. But as I was leaving, I glanced back at the glass door, and my stomach turned cold. All over the bottom half of the glass were smeared handprints. Dozens of them. Small. Greasy. As if a crowd of children had been pressing their hands against it, trying to get inside. I drove home with the sun rising, but the sense of dread clung to me because I knew whatever had been out there all night hadn't been kids playing around. Kids don't stand perfectly still in the shadows. Kids don't knock in perfect, deliberate rhythms. Kids don't leave handprints after vanishing into thin air. And kids definitely don't giggle outside at 3 in the morning when there's no one there to make the sound. I didn't last much longer at that job. A week later, I quit. I told the owner I couldn't handle the hours, but the truth was I couldn't handle the night anymore. Not after that. Because sometimes when I close my eyes, I swear I can still hear it. Tap, 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 and I can still see those tiny handprints waiting at the glass, wanting in. Story the end. The first night I worked alone on the graveyard shift at the gas station, I told myself it wasn't going to be so bad. I had grown up in a small Midwestern town where nothing ever really happened. I figured I'd spend the nights cleaning the coffee pots, wiping down counters, watching some late-night TV on my phone when the customers slowed to a trickle. It was only 8 hours, midnight to 8 in the morning, and I needed the money badly enough that I would have convinced myself of anything. The place sat just off the highway, one of those 24-hour convenience stores attached to a bank of fuel pumps. At night, the lot was mostly lit by buzzing fluorescent lamps that cast everything in a cold, pale glow. Beyond the pumps, darkness stretched in every direction. Cornfields to the east and west, the shadow of the woods to the north, and the highway running south into nothing but black. When I pulled into the lot for my first shift, there were only 2 cars out front. My manager's beat-up Buick and a rusty sedan parked way off in the corner with nobody inside. Inside, the hum of the coolers filled the empty store. My manager, Carl, was waiting at the counter. He looked relieved to see me, like he couldn't wait to hand the place over. "Lock the side door after midnight," he said, sliding the keys across the counter. "Use the front only. Don't prop it open. Don't go outside unless you absolutely have to." I asked him why, but he just shook his head. "It's policy. Keep the doors locked, keep the lights on, and you'll be fine. Call the sheriff's office if you get trouble." That should have been my first warning, but I brushed it off. I was 23 and figured he was just paranoid after too many years in retail. The first few hours were uneventful. A trucker came in around 1 a.m. for coffee and cigarettes. A couple of college kids grabbed some snacks after what smelled like a long night of drinking, and a guy in a delivery van stopped to use the bathroom. After 2, though, the place went dead quiet. The only sounds were the hum of the lights and the occasional rattle from the ice machine outside. It was around 3 when I noticed the sedan still parked in the lot. I figured it belonged to one of the customers, but when I checked the security monitor, the same car had been sitting there since before I arrived. I leaned closer to the grainy black and white feed. No one ever got out of it. No one ever went near it. Just a car sitting in the far corner of the lot, dark, unmoving. By 4, I was jittery from too much coffee. Every time I looked out the front windows, I saw that sedan sitting there, like it was waiting for me. The glass reflected the store's lights, so I couldn't make out the inside clearly. Sometimes, though, I swore I saw movement, like someone shifting in the driver's seat. I finally worked up the nerve to step outside and take the trash to the dumpster. The air was freezing, sharp against my skin. The lot was silent except for the buzz of the lights overhead. I walked past the pumps, bags in hand, and tried not to look toward the corner. But of course, I did. The car was there, door facing me, windows dark. My chest tightened. For just a second, I thought I saw the shape of a face in the driver's seat, pale and unmoving. I blinked, and it was gone. I tossed the trash, hurried back inside, and locked the door behind me. When I checked the monitor again, the car hadn't moved. By the end of my shift, dawn was breaking, and Carl came back. I mentioned the sedan, but when we went outside to look, it was gone. No tire tracks, no sign anyone had been there. Carl just frowned and said, "You'll see weird things on this shift. Don't let it get to you." I thought it was just my imagination until the second night. This time, the lot was empty when I arrived, but by 2 in the morning, the same sedan appeared in the same spot. No headlights, no sound of an engine, just there when I glanced at the monitor. I froze, heart pounding. I tried to tell myself it must have been a local who liked parking there, but every time I checked, the car just sat quiet like before. Around 3, the phone rang. It startled me so badly I nearly dropped it. I lifted the receiver and said hello, but there was only silence. Then faintly a man's voice whispered, "Come outside." I slammed the phone down so hard it rattled the counter. My hands were shaking. I tried to calm myself, telling myself it was a prank. But when I checked the monitor again, the sedan's headlights were on, blazing white across the lot, aimed directly at the store. I nearly called the sheriff right then, but something stopped me. Maybe I didn't want to look like an idiot over nothing. Maybe I wanted to prove to myself I wasn't scared. I stayed behind the counter, eyes glued to the monitors. By 4, the lights on the sedan clicked off. When I finally worked up the courage to look out the window, the car was gone again. I didn't say a word to Carl the next morning. On the third night, it got worse. The car showed up around 1:30. I didn't even need to check the monitor anymore. I could feel it out there. I kept the doors locked, refused to go outside, and avoided the windows as much as possible. But around 2, I heard it. The sound of tires crunching gravel, slow and deliberate. I froze, listening. The noise circled the building, stopping by the side door I'd locked. Then, silence. My stomach dropped when I heard a new sound, the handle of the locked door rattling, once, twice, like someone was testing it. I grabbed the phone and dialed the sheriff's office. A deputy answered, and I told him someone was trying to get in. He promised to send a car right away. While I was on the phone, the rattling stopped. I peeked at the monitor and saw nothing but the empty lot. The sedan wasn't in its usual spot. My mouth went dry. Whoever was out there wasn't in the car anymore. I stayed crouched behind the counter, waiting for the deputy. Minutes stretched on, my heart pounding in my ears. Then I heard it again, this time from the back of the store. 3 slow, deliberate knocks on the metal delivery door. I wanted to scream, but I stayed quiet, clutching the phone. The knocking came again, louder. Then silence. When the deputy finally arrived, lights flashing, the lot was empty. He checked the doors, the dumpster, the field across the road, but there was nothing. No car, no footprints, no sign anyone had been there at all. He told me to call again if I saw anything strange. I quit a week later. I told Carl I couldn't handle the hours, but the truth was, I couldn't handle that car. Every night it came back, and every night it got closer. The last night I worked, I swear I saw someone standing just beyond the pumps, watching me through the glass. They didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, a pale shape in the shadows until dawn broke and they vanished. I don't know who or what it was. But sometimes when I drive past that gas station late at night, I still see the outline of that sedan in the corner of the lot, and I never, ever stop. Story the end. It started as a typical Monday night for me. I worked at a 24-hour convenience store in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Ohio. The shift itself wasn't unusual. Usually a few late-night customers, the occasional police officer grabbing coffee, and a lot of empty hours where I could listen to music or check my phone. But that night, things felt different. From the moment I stepped inside the fluorescent-lit store, the air felt heavier, almost suffocating. My first instinct was to shake it off as stress, but that feeling lingered. I unlocked the door at 10 p.m., switched on the lights, and immediately noticed that the automatic doors were moving slower than usual, like they were dragging. I pushed the carts aside, grabbed my register keys, and headed to the counter. The store smelled faintly of cleaning chemicals, but there was an underlying metallic scent I couldn't place. It reminded me of rust or old blood, and it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The first customer came around 10:15. An older man, maybe in his 60s, wearing a brown trench coat and a hat pulled low over his eyes. He didn't speak much, just shuffled around, staring at the shelves. When he finally came to the counter, he put a single pack of gum down. I scanned it, and he handed me a $10 bill. His hand was shaking, and I noticed his fingernails were blackened, not dirty black, like something had grown under them. I smiled politely and handed him his change, and he left without a word. After he left, I went to restock the shelves in aisle 3. That's when I first noticed it, a reflection in the security cameras. In the corner of the footage, near the frozen foods, there was a shadow moving, but I wasn't in that aisle. I stopped, checked the cameras, and saw nothing there. I tried to convince myself it was just my eyes playing tricks. Around midnight, a woman walked in. She looked normal at first. Early 30s, dressed casually, holding a baby. But something was off. She didn't speak, didn't acknowledge me, just shuffled to the magazine rack and started flipping through magazines. When I greeted her, she didn't respond. The baby wasn't moving either. I watched as she carried it like a mannequin, the head dangling unnaturally to one side. My stomach dropped. I forced a smile and asked if she wanted a bag, and she finally spoke, but it wasn't words, just a low, gurgling sound. She left, and when I looked at the camera outside, the baby wasn't there anymore. The woman had vanished entirely. I called my manager around 12:30 a.m., trying to explain what I saw. He laughed it off, saying I was overtired. He told me to stay alert, but not to worry. I tried to calm myself down, making coffee and checking the store perimeter through the cameras. That's when I noticed something that froze me in place. On the camera facing the back parking lot, a figure was standing near my delivery door. At first, I thought it was a man, but the way it moved, it was jerky, unnatural, almost like it was being dragged forward by invisible strings. It was tall, impossibly thin, and its head was tilted all the way back so it was looking at the ceiling. I flicked through the camera angles, but it didn't move. And then it disappeared. I tried to convince myself I was imagining things. I had to. But a few minutes later, the front door chime rang. Nobody had entered, but the chime went off. I rushed to the door. Nothing. I checked the cameras again. The shadow was back, standing in the middle of the aisle with the snacks. I could see its features now, or rather, the lack of them. There was a dark void where its face should have been. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breathing. The night dragged on. Every time I moved, I felt watched. The cameras flickered in a strange way, like static in the corners, and sometimes I could swear I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. I tried to focus on mundane tasks, stocking, sweeping, counting inventory, but each time I looked up, the shadow or another was closer. At 2 a.m., a man came in. He looked like he'd been driving for hours. His eyes were bloodshot, and he kept glancing around nervously. He bought a bottle of water and a sandwich, and when he reached the counter, he whispered, "Don't stay after midnight." I laughed nervously. "It's only 2. I've been fine." He shook his head violently, eyes wide, and said, "They follow you. Always follow. You can't see them until they're close." He dropped some money on the counter and ran out, disappearing into the night before I could respond. I sat down in the back office, trying to calm my nerves. I told myself it was just stress. I had pulled too many all-nighters last week. But the air grew colder, and I could hear faint whispers, like someone talking in the next aisle. I checked the cameras again, and my blood ran cold. The shadow was in the break room with me, crouched on the floor, facing the camera. I didn't know what to do. I grabbed the phone to call the police, but there was no dial tone. The line was dead. Then the lights flickered and went out, plunging the store into darkness. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear anything else. Then I heard it, a low, rasping breathing coming from the aisles. I grabbed a flashlight from under the counter and shined it around. The beam caught the shadow standing right at the end of aisle 5. Its head tilted unnaturally, and for the first time, I noticed its hands. They were long, thin, ending in blackened claws that scraped the linoleum as it moved. It wasn't walking. It was floating just above the ground, and it moved too fast for any human. I ran toward the front door, but it was locked. Not electronically. It was like something was physically holding it shut. I pounded on it, screaming for help, but no one was outside. The whispers grew louder, overlapping, as if a dozen voices were speaking in unison. I could hear my own name being called over and over. Desperate, I grabbed a broom and swung at the shadow. The moment the broom touched it, it let out a sound that wasn't human, a deep, guttural shriek that made my ears ring. I stumbled backward, tripping over a display, and the shadow lunged at me. I felt cold air rush past my face like ice against my skin, and then it was gone. I ran to the break room, locked myself in, and sat against the wall. I could hear footsteps pacing outside, heavy, deliberate, circling the room. Every now and then a shadow would pass under the door. I tried to convince myself to stay calm, to breathe, to wait it out. But the pacing never stopped. At around 4 a.m., the store phone rang. I jumped, heart in my throat. It was a local number I didn't recognize. I answered it. A deep, distorted voice said, "You can't leave. Not yet." The line went dead. I dropped the phone and ran to the back office, trying every exit, every door. But all of them were either locked or led to walls. The clock on the wall ticked slowly toward 5 a.m. The sun was starting to rise, and I could feel the shadows retreating slightly, like they hated the light. The whispers faded. When a man came in through the automatic doors, a delivery guy, I didn't hesitate. I ran straight to him, screaming for help. He looked at me like I was insane, but he unlocked the doors, and I bolted out into the morning air, gasping, crying, shaking. I didn't go back that night. I called my manager and quit immediately. He laughed nervously, saying the store had a weird energy sometimes, and that I should take a break. But I knew what I saw, and I knew it wasn't just in my head. The next week, a coworker covering my shift told me the cameras had recorded everything. When the footage was reviewed, all you could see were strange, fleeting shadows moving at impossible speeds, objects shifting on their own, and my terrified face as I tried to escape. I never went back. I left Ohio shortly after, moved hundreds of miles away, but the memories stayed. Sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I can still hear the whispers, calling my name from the darkness, reminding me that what I saw that night wasn't just a nightmare. I've tried to tell people, but most think I'm exaggerating or hallucinating. But I know the truth. There are things out there, things that wait in the quiet hours of the night, watching, following, and sometimes they step into our world. Even now, years later, I check the locks twice before going to bed, and I never ever stay out past midnight. Story the end. I started my night shift at the hospital around 11:30, just as the last of the day's staff were clocking out. The place had a certain calm after dark, a stillness that made every footstep sound like thunder and every distant beep echo a little too long. I worked as a transport aide, moving patients between rooms, taking samples to the lab, and sometimes assisting nurses when needed. The pay wasn't great, but the hours suited me, and I liked the quiet, most of the time. The first week went fine. I got used to the rhythm of the building at night, the faint hum of the fluorescent lights, the distant sound of the automatic doors opening for deliveries, and the occasional groan of old pipes. Most nights, I shared the shift with at least one other person, usually a nurse or another aide, so the building never felt completely empty. But one night in early November, I was scheduled alone. Everyone else was off for some reason, maybe a last-minute call-out, and I was the only one in the hospital besides the night security guard, who stayed mostly in the lobby monitoring cameras. I didn't think much of it at first, just another quiet night. The first few hours were uneventful. I wheeled a patient down from the 5th floor to radiology, dropped off a tray, and returned. The hospital at night is like a different world. The daylight chaos disappears, leaving these long, hollow corridors lined with closed doors. The fluorescent lights flickered occasionally, giving the shadows movement where there shouldn't be any. It started around 2 in the morning. I was walking down the hallway to the lab when I thought I saw someone standing at the end of the corridor. I stopped, blinking, trying to focus. But when I got closer, the hallway was empty. The shadows between the rooms seemed darker than usual, almost like they were absorbing the light. I told myself it was my imagination. Hospitals are full of weird noises at night, the pipes, the ventilators, the intercom clicking on and off. But then I heard it, a soft, low humming. At first, I thought it was a machine, maybe one of the monitors left on in a patient's room. But it was different, human-like, melodic, almost a lullaby. It came from the end of the hallway near the old psychiatric wing, a part of the hospital that had been closed for renovations months ago. Curiosity and dread pulled me toward it. The hall was long, the tiles echoing every step I took. As I approached the wing, the humming stopped abruptly. I froze, listening. Silence. Too quiet. And then I heard the soft shuffle of feet behind the closed doors. Not quick, not running. Slow, deliberate, dragging. I raised my flashlight, scanning the hallway, but the doors were locked. No one should have been there. The security guard had a set of keys, but I knew he wouldn't be wandering the halls like that. I tried to shake it off and walk back toward the elevators. My heart was racing, my pulse in my ears, but I tried to act calm. Then I heard it again, a whisper almost behind me, barely audible. "Don't leave." I spun around, flashlight cutting through the dim light. Empty hallway. No one. My stomach turned cold. I told myself to calm down, to rationalize it. Maybe a patient had wandered somewhere. But the psychiatric wing had been empty for months, locked off and stripped of equipment. I tried to focus on my work, moving a cart of clean linens to the fourth floor. As I passed the nurse's station, I noticed the intercom flicker to life. The speaker crackled, then a voice came through. It wasn't the security guard. It wasn't anyone I recognized. It was a low, distorted whisper, repeating the same phrase over and over. Stay with us. Stay with us. I froze. My skin crawled. I tried the intercom button to call the guard, but it wouldn't work. The line was dead. My radio crackled with static, then went silent. I was alone. I went back to the hallway near the psychiatric wing to check the emergency exits, just to reassure myself that no one could get in unnoticed. That's when I saw it. A shadow at the far end, moving against the wall, but it didn't walk. It glided, impossibly fast, barely touching the ground. I blinked, and it vanished. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but the hospital protocol required me to check on all the wards, even at night. I took a deep breath and went to the 5th floor. The lights flickered as I passed the old storage rooms. And then, in the corner of the hallway, I saw her. A girl, young, maybe 8 or 9, standing perfectly still, staring at the wall. She was wearing an old hospital gown, dirty and tattered, hair matted. But the worst part was her face. It was pale, almost translucent, with dark, hollow eyes. And she was smiling, slowly, unnaturally smiling. I froze, my flashlight trembling in my hand. I called out, "Hey! Are you okay?" No response. She tilted her head, listening, then took a step toward me. Her movement was jerky, unnatural, like a puppet. I stumbled back, heart racing. Don't come any closer." My voice shook, echoing off the walls. She smiled wider, tilting her head again, and whispered, "Stay with us." I ran. I don't remember if I took the elevator or the stairs, but I ran down the halls, past rooms I had checked only minutes before. Everything was wrong. The lights flickered violently, shadows stretched impossibly long, and I could hear that humming following me, growing louder, mixed with whispers. I reached the lobby, nearly collapsing. The security guard was asleep in his chair, unaware of anything. I pounded on the desk, shouting, but he didn't wake. That's when I saw the figure in the corner. Another child, then another, until the lobby was full of them, all pale, all smiling, all staring at me. And the whispers. They were louder now, all around me. "Stay, stay, stay." I backed up toward the main entrance, fumbling with the keys to the emergency door. My hands shook violently. Just as I unlocked it and swung the door open, the children were gone. Silent. Empty lobby. The whispering stopped. The humming stopped. Only the fluorescent lights hummed above me. Normal again. I ran to my car and didn't stop until I reached home. I called in sick for the next few days, then requested a transfer to a day shift position. I never went back to the hospital at night after that. Years later, I still dream about it. Those hollow eyes, those smiles, the whispering voices in the dark hallways. And sometimes when the wind blows just right, I hear that faint humming at the edge of my consciousness. I've never told anyone the full story. Not my coworkers, not my family. They'd think I was crazy, but I know what I saw. I know what I heard. And I'll never forget the feeling of being completely alone in that hospital, with them watching, waiting, and whispering, "Stay with us." Story the end. I started the night shift at the small rural motel just after sunset, the sky bruised purple and orange behind the hills. The place wasn't much, a 2-story building with peeling paint, cracked windows, and a front desk that smelled faintly of old carpet and cleaner. But the owner had offered a decent wage, and I needed the money. The day staff had left just as I arrived, wishing me luck, their faces tight with half smiles that didn't reach their eyes. The first hour was quiet. I checked in a late couple from the city, took a few phone calls, restocked the mini fridge in the lobby. The fluorescent bulbs buzzed overhead, making the air feel thick and unnatural. Outside, the parking lot was empty except for a lone sedan tucked into the corner, its engine cold and dark. By midnight, the quiet had become oppressive. The hum of the fluorescent lights was the only sound, and even that seemed distant, echoing oddly through the lobby. That's when I noticed the first thing out of place. The front door had been unlocked. I was sure I had locked it before the evening ended. My stomach tightened. I checked the cameras, empty parking lot. Nothing. Then I heard it. A faint scraping sound, like fingernails on the walls, coming from the hallway that led to the rooms. I froze, listening. The sound stopped. I told myself it was the couple in room 7, restless from their long drive. I shook my head and went to check. The hallway was empty. Room 7 was locked. The bed appeared untouched. I walked slowly back to the lobby, every creak of the floorboards echoing like gunshots. I tried to brush it off. Old buildings make noises, I told myself. Around 1:30, I heard it again, louder this time. A soft tapping, deliberate, at the window of the office. My pulse spiked. I grabbed a flashlight and slowly approached. The parking lot was empty, nothing but shadows and the wind rustling through the sparse trees. I locked the door behind me, trying to convince myself I was being paranoid. I sat at the desk staring at the empty monitors of the security cameras. That's when I saw movement. At first, I thought it was a trick of the screen, a flicker, a glitch. But then it solidified. A small figure, pale and thin, standing at the end of the hall leading to the guest rooms. Its head was tilted unnaturally, and though the cameras were grainy, I could see its eyes, dark, empty voids that seemed to stare right through me. I blinked. The figure vanished. My stomach knotted. I told myself it was my imagination, a trick of shadows, fatigue. I called the front office number listed on the wall. Dead. No dial tone. My phone had no signal either. Over the next couple of hours, the disturbances escalated. I heard whispers, faint but unmistakable, coming from the hallways. I checked the rooms. Empty. The air seemed to grow colder, heavier, pressing down on me like a living weight. Doors that had been locked swung open on their own. Chairs were slightly moved, the floor scuffed where no one had walked. At about 3 a.m., I was sitting at the desk, staring at the camera feed, when I saw it again. The figure was closer now, just outside the elevator doors. It didn't move, didn't blink, just stared. Then it tilted its head, and I felt it. Something inside me shiver, a cold that wasn't just physical. I backed away slowly, heart hammering, when the lobby phone rang. I jumped, nearly dropping the receiver. I answered. A low, rasping whisper came through, almost unintelligible, repeating one word, leave. I hung up, trembling. The figure was gone from the camera. I tried to steady myself, telling myself to call someone, anyone, to come and check. My calls went straight to voicemail. Then came the pounding, soft at first, then heavier, deliberate. On the glass door, on the windows, all around me. I could hear the whispers again, merging into a shrill chorus, echoing through the walls and floors. I grabbed my flashlight and ran toward the back exit, hoping to get to my car. As I rounded the corner, I nearly collided with it. The figure was right there in the hallway, pale, hollow-eyed, grinning in a way that made my stomach churn. I stumbled backward, falling against the wall. Its voice whispered directly into my mind, "Stay!" I scrambled to the exit, throwing the door open and running into the night. The cold air hit me like a punch. Behind me, the motel stood silent and dark, windows staring like empty eyes. I didn't stop running until the first faint light of dawn painted the horizon. I quit that same day. I told the owner I had an emergency, that I couldn't return. But I know the truth. Whatever that thing was in the motel, it hadn't wanted me to leave. And sometimes, when I drive past that place at night, I swear I see those hollow eyes staring from the lobby, waiting for the next night shift worker to walk in alone. I still have nightmares. The whispers never leave completely, and I know deep down that it's still there, patient, waiting for the next soul foolish enough to be alone in that building after dark. Story the end. I had just started a new night shift at a small rural motel in upstate New York. It was the kind of place that catered to truckers and travelers passing through. Cheap rooms, faded carpets, flickering neon lights out front. The owner, an older man named Carl, had hired me as the overnight desk clerk. My job was simple: check in guests, answer the phone, and keep an eye on the property until morning. I thought it would be quiet, maybe even boring. The first couple of nights were uneventful. A trucker came in around 1 a.m., a couple on the run from a snowstorm checked in, nothing out of the ordinary. The motel itself was old, with narrow hallways, peeling wallpaper, and a faint smell of mildew. During the day, it seemed harmless, but at night, the building felt different, heavier somehow, like the shadows themselves were alive. It was around 2 a.m. on my third night when things started. I was sitting at the front desk, flipping through a logbook and sipping coffee, when I heard a knock at the office window. I looked up, but the parking lot was empty. I thought maybe a branch had hit the glass or some stray animal, so I ignored it. A few minutes later, the knock came again, louder this time. My stomach tightened. I stood and went to the window, peering into the dark lot. Nothing. Just the empty asphalt, the snow starting to drift lazily across the lights. I shook my head and returned to my desk, trying to convince myself I was imagining things. Around 2:30 a.m., I noticed movement on the security monitors. There were 4 cameras, one at the front, one covering the lot, and 2 inside the hallways. On the monitor for the north hallway, I saw something standing at the far end. Tall, thin, dressed in dark clothing, head tilted slightly to one side. It didn't move. It didn't blink, just stared at the camera. I froze. My heart thudded in my chest. I told myself it was probably a glitch, maybe a trick of the lighting. But when I glanced up at the actual hallway, the end was empty. No one there. The air in the office felt suddenly colder. My breath fogged slightly against the glass of the monitor. I stood up, grabbed the flashlight, and slowly made my way to the hallway. The floorboards creaked under my weight, each sound magnified in the silence. As I reached the corner, I froze. There it was, just standing in the middle of the hallway, motionless. I could barely make out the outline in the dim light. Its eyes, black, empty voids, seemed to bore into me. I stumbled backward, almost dropping the flashlight. When I looked again, it had vanished. I blinked, telling myself I was seeing things. Around 3 a.m., I heard footsteps in the hallway behind me. Slow, deliberate, dragging. I spun around, flashlight cutting through the darkness, but the hallway was empty. I ran back to the office, heart racing, and locked the door behind me. The footsteps didn't stop. They circled the office, outside the door, around the desk, just beyond the walls. I could hear whispers, low and unintelligible, coming from every direction at once. I pressed myself against the desk, shaking, trying to keep calm. By 4 a.m., I could barely stand it. The lights flickered violently, and I saw it in the reflection of the office window. Another shadow, tall and dark, moving against the glass as if it were watching me. I wanted to scream, to run, but my legs wouldn't move. At 5 a.m., the first light of dawn started creeping across the parking lot. With it, the oppressive feeling lifted slightly. The hallway looked empty again. The monitors showed nothing unusual. The whispers and footsteps had stopped. I never returned to that night shift. Carl asked me why, but I just said the hours weren't for me. Deep down, I knew it wasn't the hours. It was the motel, the shadows, the dark figure that glided through the halls. Even now, years later, when I drive past that motel in the dead of night, I catch myself staring at the dark windows. Sometimes I swear I see a tall, thin shadow standing at the end of the hallway, head tilting, waiting. Story the end.